The watercolor painting slipped from Claire's trembling fingers, landing face down in a puddle of spilled coffee on the scorching Austin sidewalk. As she dropped to her knees, desperately trying to save the artwork that would pay for her next chemo treatment, dozens of feet stepped around her, until one pair of worn work boots stopped. "Please," she whispered to the stranger, "that painting is worth my next breath." What Ethan Hayes did next would transform not just one life, but three souls forever intertwined by fate. Dear friends, welcome to a story that traveled from Austin to hearts worldwide. Comment your city below. Let's see how far this journey of hope reaches. Now, settle in as we begin. The Texas sun bore down mercilessly on South Congress Avenue that Tuesday afternoon, the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer like water, and sent most sensible people scurrying for air-conditioned shelter. But Claire Dawson had nowhere to go. She sat on a faded quilt spread across the sidewalk, her collection of watercolor paintings arranged in neat rows around her like a fragile fortress against the world's indifference. At 24, Claire should have been conquering the world, fresh out of art school with dreams as vibrant as the colors she mixed on her palette. Instead, she wore a baseball cap to hide the patches where her honey blonde hair had surrendered to chemotherapy, and oversized sunglasses that concealed the dark circles etched by sleepless nights and relentless nausea. The medical bracelet on her wrist caught the sunlight, a constant reminder of her new identity. Cancer patient, stage 3 lymphoma, terminal if she couldn't afford treatment. "Excuse me," a woman in designer heels paused briefly, her shadow providing momentary relief from the sun. "How much for the bluebonnet field?" $40, Claire replied, her voice hoarse from the morning's bout of treatment-induced vomiting. The woman wrinkled her nose as if the price carried an unpleasant odor. "For a street painting? I'll give you 15. Before Claire could respond, the woman's phone rang, and she walked away mid-conversation, leaving Claire staring at the painting. 3 weeks of work between hospital visits, painted with hands that shook from medication, each brushstroke a small victory against the fatigue that threatened to consume her. The rejection stung more than it should have. She'd sold exactly one painting in 4 hours. A small study of Lady Bird Lake that went for $20 to a tourist who'd haggled her down from $30. $20 toward the $8,000 she needed for next month's treatment. The math was a crushing weight on her chest, heavier than the tumor that had taken residence near her spine. Claire reached for her water bottle, her movements careful and deliberate. The oncologist had warned her about dehydration, especially in this heat, but the bottle was nearly empty and she couldn't afford to leave her spot to refill it. Every minute away was a potential sale lost, a step further from survival. That's when it happened. A gust of wind, sudden and violent in the still afternoon, swept across the avenue. Claire lunged forward, trying to hold down her paintings, but the wind was faster, stronger. Her largest piece, a sunset over the Austin skyline that had taken 2 months to complete, lifted into the air like a kite without a string. She scrambled after it, her weak legs betraying her, sending her stumbling into a businessman who cursed at her for spilling his iced latte. The painting landed in the puddle of coffee, the carefully rendered sky dissolving into brown chaos. Claire fell to her knees beside it, her hands hovering over the ruined canvas, unable to touch it, unable to accept what she was seeing. 2 months of work, her best piece, the one she'd priced at $200, her rent money, her medication money, her staying alive money, destroyed in seconds. "No, no, no," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she tried to lift the soaked paper. It tore at her touch, the sunset bleeding into abstract nothing. Around her, the foot traffic continued its relentless pace. Designer shoes and flip-flops, boots and sneakers, all stepping around her like she was nothing more than another piece of urban debris. Someone muttered about homeless people making the neighborhood look bad. Another person took a photo, not to help, but to post on social media with some vapid comment about city life. The tears came then, hot and shameful, dripping onto the ruined painting and mixing with the coffee stains. She hated crying in public, hated the vulnerability of it, but her body was too exhausted to maintain its usual defenses. The chemotherapy had stripped away more than just her hair. It had peeled back every layer of strength she'd built over 24 years, leaving her raw and exposed to every small cruelty the world had to offer. "That's quite a mess." The voice was deep, gentle, with a hint of Texas drawl that marked him as a local. Claire looked up through her tears to see a pair of worn work boots, not stepping around her but planted firmly in front of her. She raised her eyes higher. Faded jeans with paint stains on the knees, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked by honest work, and finally, a face that belonged to a man in his late 30s with kind brown eyes and stubble that suggested he'd missed his morning shave. "Let me help," he said, already kneeling beside her, his hands reaching for the scattered paintings that were still threatening to take flight. "Please don't," Claire said quickly, embarrassed by her tears, by her weakness, by the whole pathetic scene. "I've got it." But he was already gathering the paintings with surprising care, his large hands gentle with the delicate paper. He stacked them properly, keeping the wet ones separate, creating order from chaos with an efficiency that spoke of someone used to solving problems. "Ethan Hayes," he said, offering his name like a gift while continuing to collect her work. "And you don't got it, not alone anyway, and that's okay." Claire wanted to argue, to maintain some shred of independence, but another wave of exhaustion hit her, the kind that came from fighting battles on multiple fronts, against cancer, against poverty, against a world that had become suddenly hostile to her existence. "Claire," she managed, watching as this stranger, Ethan, carefully examined each painting before adding it to the pile. He wasn't just collecting them. He was looking at them, really seeing them. "You painted these?" He held up a piece depicting Barton Springs at dawn, the water rendered in impossible shades of blue and green. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. "They're beautiful." He said it simply, without the patronizing tone she'd grown accustomed to, without the pity that usually followed when people noticed her medical bracelet and put the pieces together. "This light, the way you captured it, my daughter would lose her mind over this. She's 9, wants to be an artist when she grows up." "That's nice," Claire said, the automatic response of someone who'd learned to deflect personal connections. Ethan continued gathering the paintings, and then he saw it. The ruined sunset, still dripping coffee and dissolving dreams. His hands stilled. "This was your best one, wasn't it?" The question was so unexpectedly perceptive that fresh tears threatened. Claire nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "How much were you asking for it?" 200, she whispered, then quickly added, "But it doesn't matter now." Ethan studied the ruined painting for a long moment, then carefully folded it and placed it in his shirt pocket. "I'll take it." "What?" Claire stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "It's destroyed." "No," Ethan said, pulling out his wallet. "It's transformed. My wife used to say that about difficult times. They don't destroy us, they transform us." He paused, a shadow crossing his features. "She passed 3 years ago. Cancer." The word hung between them, heavy with shared understanding. "I'm sorry," Claire said, meaning it in ways that only someone facing their own mortality could mean it. "Me too." Ethan counted out $200 in 20s, then added 5 more. "For the coffee damage," he explained with a small smile. "I can't," Claire started, but Ethan was already moving on, examining the other paintings with genuine interest. "How much for this one?" He held up the blue bonnet field, the one the woman in designer heels had dismissed. 40, but I'll take it. And this one?" He picked up a study of the Congress Avenue Bridge with bats streaming into the sunset. 30, but you don't have to. And this one looks like Zilker Park in spring. Am I right? Claire nodded, overwhelmed by his enthusiasm, by his refusal to treat her like a charity case, even though they both knew that's exactly what this was. "My daughter, Ivy, she loves Zilker. How much?" 50. "Bargain." He was pulling out more money, and Claire's hands shook as she watched him count bills. "You know what? Why don't we make it an even 500 for the 5 paintings I'm taking? I have a feeling they're going to be worth a lot more someday." "That's too much," Claire protested, even as her mind calculated what $500 meant. Another week of life, another chance at tomorrow. "It's business," Ethan said firmly. "I invest in art I believe in. Speaking of which, when's your next show?" Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. "I don't do shows. I sit on sidewalks and hope people don't step on my work." "Why?" The simple question demanded a complex answer. Claire found herself studying this stranger who'd knelt beside her in her lowest moment, who'd gathered her scattered dreams with careful hands, who'd bought ruined art like it was treasure. Because galleries require connections I don't have, walls I can't afford to rent, opening nights I'm too sick to attend, she said, surprised by her own honesty. Because I'm 24 years old and fighting stage 3 lymphoma with watercolors and wishful thinking. Because sitting on this sidewalk is the only option between me and giving up entirely. Ethan absorbed this information without flinching, without the look of pity she'd grown to despise. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. A little girl with his brown eyes and a smile that could power the city grinned back at her, standing in front of a wall covered in finger paintings. "That's Ivy," he said with obvious pride. "She's the reason I get up every morning, the reason I didn't follow my wife into the dark when she left us. She's also incredibly stubborn about supporting local artists. We have a tradition. Every month, we find a new piece of art for our home. She insists it has to be from someone who needs the sale more than galleries need commission." "She sounds special," Claire said, managing a small smile at the thought of a 9-year-old with such specific principles. "She is. She's also going to want to meet the artist who painted these. How about we get you out of this sun and grab some lunch? There's a taco place around the corner that has the best agua fresca in Austin, perfect for hot days and chemotherapy-induced nausea." The casual way he mentioned the nausea, like he understood, like he'd been there, made Claire's throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I don't need charity," she said, the words automatic even as her body screamed for water, for food, for rest. "Good, because I'm not offering any. I'm offering lunch between business associates. You're an artist, I'm a buyer. We should discuss your upcoming collection." He stood, extending his hand to help her up. "Besides, Ivy will never forgive me if I don't get your contact information. She's going to want to commission something specific, probably involving unicorns or dragons or both." Claire looked at his extended hand, calloused from real work, steady and sure. Then at her paintings, no longer scattered but carefully stacked and protected. The ruined sunset peeked out from his shirt pocket like a promise that broken things could still have value. She took his hand. The contact was brief, just long enough for him to help her to her feet, but Claire felt something shift in that moment. Not romantic, not yet. She was too sick, too scared, too focused on survival for romance. But something else, equally powerful. The possibility that she wasn't as alone as she'd believed. "I need to pack up," she said, gesturing to her supplies. "Let me help." Ethan was already moving, folding her quilt with military precision. "I renovate houses," he explained, noting her surprise at his efficiency. "You learn to pack and unpack quickly when every job is in a different location." Together they gathered her things, the paintings, the quilt, the small collection of brushes and paints she'd managed to afford. Ethan carried most of it without making a big deal about it, without making her feel weak for needing help. It was a kindness so subtle she almost missed it, the way he'd normalized assistance, made it feel like collaboration rather than charity. The taco place was a hole-in-the-wall establishment with hand-painted murals covering every surface, and the smell of fresh tortillas that made Claire's stomach rumble despite the constant nausea. Ethan ordered for both of them in fluent Spanish, choosing simple foods that would be easy on her system: chicken soup, plain rice, that agua fresca he'd promised. "You speak Spanish," Claire observed, sipping the watermelon drink and feeling her body respond to the hydration like a dying plant to rain. "My wife was from Mexico City," Ethan explained, his fingers absently spinning his wedding ring, which he still wore. "Elena. She taught me the language, the culture, how to make proper salsa verde. She would have loved your paintings. She had an eye for beauty in unexpected places." "Tell me about her," Claire said, surprising herself with the request. Ethan's face transformed when he talked about Elena, soft with memory but not destroyed by it. He told Claire about their meeting at a coffee shop where Elena had been sketching, how she'd captured him in charcoal before they'd ever exchanged words. He talked about their wedding in her grandmother's backyard, surrounded by papel picado and marigolds. He described Ivy's birth, how Elena had sung to her in Spanish and English, creating a bilingual lullaby that Ivy still requested when she was sick. "The cancer came when Ivy was 5, he said, his voice steady but his eyes distant. "Ovarian, stage 4 by the time they caught it. Elena fought for 18 months, fought like a warrior, like a mother who refused to leave her child. But sometimes fighting isn't enough." How did you survive it? Claire asked, the question desperate, searching. I almost didn't, Ethan admitted. Those first months after, I was drowning. But Ivy needed me functional, not just present. So I learned to swim in grief instead of letting it pull me under. I learned that surviving loss isn't about moving on. It's about moving forward with the loss as part of you. Claire pushed her rice around her plate, processing his words. I'm scared, she admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. Not just of dying, but of fighting this hard and losing anyway. Of putting everyone through this just to fail in the end. Everyone? Ethan asked gently. Who's everyone? Claire's laugh was bitter. That's the thing. There is no everyone. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19. No siblings. My college friends disappeared when I got sick. Cancer isn't exactly conducive to maintaining friendships. It's just me, my paintings, and a disease that's trying to kill me faster than I can afford to stop it. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with truth. Ethan reached across the table and touched her hand briefly, a gesture of solidarity rather than pity. Not anymore, he said simply. You've got a client now, remember? And a very demanding 9-year-old who's going to want regular updates on her commissioned unicorn dragon hybrid painting. I haven't agreed to that yet, Claire pointed out, but she was almost smiling. You will. Ivy's inherited her mother's persistence and my stubborn streak. It's a powerful combination. They talked for 2 hours, the restaurant filling and emptying around them as the lunch rush came and went. Ethan asked about her art, her training, her influences. He listened to her discuss color theory and composition with an attention that suggested genuine interest rather than politeness. When she mentioned she'd been experimenting with mixed media before the medical bills forced her to stick to watercolors, the cheapest option, he made a mental note she didn't know would matter later. I should go, Claire finally said, noting the time. I have a treatment at 4. Let me drive you, Ethan offered immediately. The bus would mean hauling all your paintings on public transport while feeling sick. My truck is right outside. Claire wanted to protest, to maintain the fiction of independence, but practicality won. She was tired, more tired than she'd been in weeks, and the thought of managing the bus with her supplies felt impossible. Ethan's truck was exactly what she'd expected, practical, well-maintained, with a car seat in the back that spoke of his primary role as a father. He loaded her supplies carefully in the bed, making sure the paintings were secure, then helped her into the passenger seat without making her feel like an invalid. The drive to the clinic was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Claire found herself studying Ethan's profile, the premature lines around his eyes that spoke of grief and laughter in equal measure, the way his hands held the steering wheel with confident ease, the slight smile that appeared when the radio played something in Spanish that probably reminded him of Elena. This is it, Claire said, indicating the cancer center that had become her second home. Ethan pulled into the patient drop-off area, but didn't immediately unlock the doors. Instead, he pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. My number, he said, handing it to her. For when you finish that commission for Ivy. Or if you need anything, a ride, someone to talk to at 3 a.m. when the fear gets too loud, whatever. Claire took the card, noting that his business, Hayes Home Renovations, had a tagline, Rebuilding Dreams, One Room at a Time. Why are you doing this? She asked, needing to understand. You don't know me. Ethan considered the question, his eyes on the cancer center's entrance where patients moved in and out like a slow tide of hope and desperation. Because 3 years ago, I sat in that waiting room every Tuesday and Thursday while Elena got her treatments. I watched people come alone, fight alone, suffer alone. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to make that journey less lonely for someone, I would. He paused, then added, and because my daughter is right, we should support local artists, especially the ones brave enough to paint beauty while facing darkness. Claire clutched the card like a lifeline, feeling something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but making room for possibility. Thank you, she said, meaning more than just the ride, the lunch, the $500 that would buy her another week of life. Thank Ivy, Ethan said with a smile. She's the one who's going to insist on that unicorn dragon painting. Claire climbed out of the truck, gathering her things with Ethan's help, as she walked toward the cancer center's entrance. She turned back to see him still watching, making sure she got inside safely. He raised his hand in a small wave, and she returned it, feeling less alone than she had in months. Inside the cancer center, the familiar smell of disinfectant and despair greeted her, but somehow it felt less oppressive today. The receptionist, Marie, who'd watched Claire fade a little more each week, did a double take. "You look different," Marie said, checking her in for treatment. "Good different." "I sold some paintings," Claire said, unable to keep the small note of pride from her voice. "That's wonderful, honey. Room 3 is ready for you." Claire made her way to the treatment room, where nurses who'd become reluctant friends prepared her for another round of poison designed to save her life. As they inserted the IV, as the chemicals began their familiar burn through her veins, she pulled out Ethan's business card and studied it. On the back, below his number, he'd written, "Art is proof that beauty exists, even in destruction. Keep painting." For the first time since her diagnosis, Claire believed she might live long enough to finish that unicorn dragon painting. The treatment took 4 hours, as always. 4 hours of chemicals dripping into her body, of nurses checking vitals, of other patients in various stages of their own battles. Claire usually spent this time in a medicated haze, trying to dissociate from the discomfort, from the reality of her situation. But today, she found herself sketching on the back of a medical form, rough outlines of a creature that was part unicorn, part dragon, wholly impossible, and somehow perfect. "That's beautiful," said the woman in the chair next to her, also hooked to an IV, also fighting her own war against cellular rebellion. "It's for a 9-year-old, Claire explained. She wants something magical." "Aren't we all 9-year-olds wanting something magical?" the woman replied with a knowing smile. Claire considered this, her pencil still moving across the paper. Maybe that was the truth of it, that facing death made everyone children again, desperate for magic, for miracles, for someone to tell them the monsters under the bed weren't real, even when those monsters were in their own bodies. By the time the treatment ended, the sun was setting, painting Austin's sky in shades of pink and orange that no watercolor could truly capture. Claire stood outside the cancer center waiting for the bus, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Miss Claire, this is Ivy Hayes. My dad gave me your number. He said you're going to paint me a unicorn dragon." The voice was young, enthusiastic, alive in a way that made Claire smile despite the nausea rolling through her system. "Hi, Ivy. Your dad mentioned you might want something magical." "Yes, but not just any unicorn dragon. It has to be one that protects kids from bad things. Like a guardian. Can you do that?" Claire thought about Ethan's eyes when he talked about his daughter, about the weight of raising a child alone after loss, about the way he'd knelt to gather her scattered paintings without hesitation. "I can do that," she promised. "Good. Dad says you're really talented. He hung one of your paintings in our kitchen already, the one with the blue bonnets. It makes me think of Mom. She loved blue bonnets." Claire's throat tightened. "I'm glad you like it. Can you come for dinner sometime? Dad makes really good enchiladas, and I want to show you my art supplies. I have gel pens that smell like fruit." In the background, Claire heard Ethan's voice, gently reminding Ivy about not pressuring people. But Claire found herself responding before he could intervene. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "Really? How about Friday? Dad always makes enchiladas on Fridays." "Ivy, let Miss Claire check her schedule." Ethan's voice came through, closer now. "Friday works," Claire interrupted, making a decision based on instinct rather than logic. "If that's okay with your dad." There was a pause, then Ethan's voice, warm with something that sounded like hope. "Friday's perfect. I'll text you the address." After they hung up, Claire stood in the dying light, her body exhausted from treatment, her mind spinning with the day's unexpected turns. This morning, she'd been alone on a sidewalk, watching her best painting dissolve in coffee, calculating how many weeks she had left before the money ran out. Now she had a commission, a dinner invitation, and the first glimpse of something that might be called hope. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Ethan. "Ivy's already planning the menu and clearing the fridge to display your artwork. Fair warning, she takes hosting very seriously. Also, I meant what I wrote. Keep painting. The world needs your particular way of seeing beauty." Claire read the message 3 times, each reading revealing another layer of kindness. She thought about Elena, the woman who taught Ethan Spanish, and left him with a daughter who wanted magical guardians painted into existence. She thought about Ivy, motherless at 6, finding comfort in bluebonnets and the promise of fruit-scented gel pens. She thought about herself, orphaned and sick, sitting on hot sidewalks trying to paint her way to survival. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe broken things could transform rather than just disappear. The bus arrived, belching diesel fumes that made her nausea worse. But as Claire climbed aboard, carefully cradling the sketch of Ivy's guardian unicorn dragon, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: anticipation for tomorrow. That night, in her studio apartment that was really just a room with a hot plate and a shared bathroom down the hall, Claire worked on the sketch despite her exhaustion. The creature that emerged from her pencil was both fierce and gentle, scales that could deflect danger, but eyes soft with compassion. A horn that could pierce through darkness, but a mane that flowed like comfort. Wings spread wide enough to shelter a child from any storm. It was, she realized, what she wished she'd had. A guardian against the cosmic unfairness of parents who died too young, of cells that turned traitor, of a world that stepped around you when you fell. At midnight, her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, exhausted and nauseated from the day's treatment, but something made her pick up. "I'm sorry," Ethan's voice came through immediately. "I know it's late. I couldn't sleep and hoped you might be awake." "Artists and insomniacs," Claire said, adjusting her position on the thin mattress that served as both bed and couch. "We keep similar hours." "How was the treatment?" It was such a simple question, but the way he asked it, like he really wanted to know, like he understood the weight of it, made Claire's eyes water. "Hard," she admitted. "They always are, but I'm working on Ivy's painting, so that's something." "Already? You just met her 3 hours ago." "She has a very specific vision, a guardian unicorn dragon that protects kids from bad things. That's a big responsibility for a mythical creature." Ethan's laugh was soft, tinged with something that might have been tears. She asked Elena for the same thing, near the end. A guardian to watch over her when Elena couldn't anymore. The weight of that revelation settled over Claire like a blanket. She looked at her sketch with new eyes, understanding now what Ivy was really asking for. Not just a painting, but a promise rendered in watercolor, a mother's protection translated into scales and wings. "I'll make it perfect," Claire whispered. "It doesn't need to be perfect," Ethan said. "It just needs to be real." Ivy can spot fake comfort from a mile away. She's had too many people try to give it to her, but real hope, real beauty, real magic, that's what she responds to. They talked until 2 a.m., their conversation wandering from art to loss to the strange grace of finding connection in unexpected places. Ethan told her about the house he was currently renovating, a Victorian that had been abandoned for years, left to rot until he saw its potential. Claire told him about her parents, artists both, who taught her to see the world in color before a drunk driver taught her to see it in shades of gray. "I should let you sleep," Ethan finally said, though neither of them had been moving toward goodbye. "I don't sleep much these days," Claire admitted. "The medications, the worry, the endless calculations of time versus money versus miracles." "Then work on the painting," Ethan suggested. "But don't exhaust yourself. Friday's enchilada night is not something you want to experience without energy. Ivy goes all out. There will be papal picado and everything." After they hung up, Claire did return to the painting, but with a different energy. She wasn't just creating art for a commission anymore. She was creating connection, building bridges between her isolated world and a family that had opened their door before she'd even knocked. The next 3 days passed in a blur of sketching, painting, and unexpected texts from both Ethan and Ivy. The child sent pictures of her own artwork, enthusiastic explosions of color that showed more feeling than technique. Ethan sent practical things, reminders to eat, offers to drive her to appointments, a photo of the bluebonnet painting now hanging in their kitchen with natural light making it glow. On Thursday, Claire had another treatment. This time, when she sat in the chair with poison dripping into her veins, she had Ivy's latest artwork to study, a family portrait that included her father, herself, and a woman made of stars that was clearly Elena. But in the corner, almost shy, was another figure holding paintbrushes like wands. When Claire texted to ask about it, Ivy responded immediately. "That's you. Dad said you're teaching me about art, and you're going to be our friend." The presumption of it, The innocent assumption that Claire would be around long enough to be their friend was both heartbreaking and healing. This child who'd lost her mother to cancer was choosing to believe in Claire's survival, and somehow that faith felt more powerful than any medicine. Friday arrived gray and humid, with storms threatening but not quite manifesting. Austin weather at its most indecisive. Claire stood in front of her tiny mirror, trying to decide if she looked presentable. The chemo had stolen her hair, leaving her with a pixie cut that was more necessity than fashion. Her skin had the pallor of someone who spent more time in hospitals than sunshine. But her eyes were bright with something that hadn't been there a week ago. She'd wrapped Ivy's painting carefully in tissue paper she'd saved from better times. The guardian unicorn dragon had turned out better than she'd hoped, a creature of power and protection, with scales that shifted from silver to purple in the light, wings that contained entire galaxies, and eyes that held the fierce love of every parent who'd ever had to leave too soon. Ethan's house was in Hyde Park, one of those neighborhoods where old Austin fought to maintain its character against the invasion of modernization. The Victorian he'd mentioned renovating turned out to be his own home, a butter-yellow confection of gingerbread trim and wraparound porches that had been loved back to life with careful hands. "You came!" Ivy burst through the front door before Claire could knock, wearing a paint-splattered apron that proclaimed "Artist at Work" in glittery letters. "I said I would." "I know, but Dad said sometimes adults say things they don't mean when they're being polite. And I was worried you were being polite. But you're here, so you weren't being polite. You were being real." The run-on sentence, delivered at maximum enthusiasm, made Claire smile genuinely for the first time in days. This child was a force of nature, all of Ethan's steadiness mixed with what must have been Elena's fire. "I brought your painting," Claire said, offering the wrapped package. Ivy's eyes went wide with the reverence children reserve for Christmas mornings and birthday surprises. "Can I open it now?" "It's yours." Ethan appeared in the doorway as Ivy tore through the tissue paper with delighted abandon. He looked different in his own space, more relaxed, wearing a Texas Longhorns t-shirt and jeans, barefoot and comfortable. His eyes met Claire's over his daughter's head, warm with welcome. "Oh," Ivy breathed, the painting revealed. "Oh, Dad, look." The child held the painting like it was made of spun glass and starlight. Her fingers traced the air above it, not quite touching, following the curve of wings, the spiral of the horn, the flow of the mane that seemed to move even on still paper. "She's perfect," Ivy whispered. "She looks exactly like the one in my dreams." Ethan moved to stand behind his daughter, his hands on her shoulders, and Claire saw his face change as he truly looked at the painting. His eyes widened, then softened, then grew bright with unshed tears. "Claire," he said, his voice rough, This is extraordinary." "Oh, she protects children from bad things," Ivy explained seriously. "Look, Dad, her wings are big enough to hide under, and her horn can fight off monsters, but her eyes are kind, see? So kids know she's safe." "I see," Ethan said, and Claire knew he did see. All of it, the layers of meaning, the promise painted in watercolor, the mother's love transformed into mythical protection. "Come in," Ivy demanded, grabbing Claire's hand with the unconscious affection of children who haven't yet learned to guard their hearts. "I need to show you where we're going to hang it, and then you need to see my art supplies, and then Dad's making enchiladas, and I helped with the salsa." The house's interior was a testament to both preservation and adaptation. Original hardwood floors gleamed under modern lighting. The walls held a mixture of family photos and local art, including Claire's bluebonnet field in a place of honor in the kitchen. It was a home that had known loss but refused to be defined by it. Ivy's room was an explosion of color and creativity. Drawings covered every available surface, and art supplies occupied more space than toys. The child had clearly inherited both parents' appreciation for beauty, even if her technical skills were still developing. "This is where she'll go," Ivy announced, indicating a space above her bed. "So she can watch over me when I sleep." Claire helped Ethan hang the painting while Ivy directed with the seriousness of a museum curator. When it was in place, the late afternoon light caught the metallic paints Claire had mixed into the watercolors, making the creature shimmer with life. "It's like she's breathing," Ivy said wonderingly. Dinner was exactly as promised. Enchiladas that could have come from Elena's own recipe, salsa that balanced heat and flavor perfectly, and conversation that flowed as naturally as paint across wet paper. Ivy dominated the discussion with stories from school, questions about art techniques, and elaborate plans for future paintings she wanted Claire to create. "Ivy," Ethan said gently when his daughter paused for breath, "let Claire eat." "It's okay," Claire said, and meant it. The child's enthusiasm was infectious, a reminder that life existed beyond hospital walls and treatment schedules. "I like hearing about your ideas." "See, Dad? She likes my ideas." After dinner, while Ethan cleaned up despite Claire's offers to help, Ivy gave her the grand tour of their home. Each room told a story. The study where Ethan worked on renovation plans, the living room where family movie nights happened every Saturday, the small altar in the hallway with Elena's photo surrounded by marigolds and candles that were always lit. "That's Mom," Ivy said matter-of-factly. "She's dead, but Dad says love doesn't die. It just changes shape. Like energy in science class." Claire studied the photo. Elena had been beautiful, with Ivy's eyes and a smile that suggested she laughed easily and often. "She would have liked you," Ivy continued with the confidence of a child who trusted her instincts. "She liked artists. She was one too, but with words. She wrote poetry in Spanish and English." "That's a special gift," Claire said, feeling the weight of being welcomed into this family's sacred spaces. "Dad kept all her journals. Sometimes he reads them to me, the happy ones. There's a lot about me when I was a baby. She called me her milagro. That means miracle." When they returned to the kitchen, Ethan had set out dessert, tres leches cake that he admitted came from a bakery Elena had loved. "I can renovate houses," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "but baking remains beyond my abilities." "Dad burns cookies," Ivy added helpfully. "Every time." As they ate cake and Ivy chatted about her upcoming school art project, Claire felt something she hadn't experienced since before her diagnosis. Normalcy. Not the artificial kind that came from pretending everything was fine, but the real kind that acknowledged brokenness while refusing to be consumed by it. When it was time to leave, Ivy hugged Claire with the full-body enthusiasm of a child who'd decided you belonged to them. "You'll come back next Friday, right?" she asked. "Dad's making tamales. Well, buying tamales, but heating them up really well." "Ivy," Ethan warned gently. "If Claire wants to," Ivy amended, but her eyes pleaded. "I'd like that," Claire said, surprising herself again with how true it was. Ethan walked her to her car, a beaten Honda that wheezed more than it should, while Ivy watched from the window, waving enthusiastically. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the painting, for coming, for giving Ivy." He paused, searching for words. "She hasn't been this animated since Elena." "She's extraordinary," Claire said. "You both are, letting me into your world when you don't even know me." "I know enough," Ethan said. "I know you create beauty while facing something terrible. I know you treat my daughter's imagination with respect. I know you understand what it's like to lose everything and keep going anyway." They stood in the humid evening, storm clouds still threatening but not delivering, the space between them charged with possibility. "The treatment's expensive," Claire said suddenly, needing him to understand the reality. $8,000 a month, and insurance covers almost nothing because it's considered experimental. I'm running out of money, probably out of time. I shouldn't be making friends with 9-year-olds who've already lost too much." Ethan's expression didn't change, didn't shift to pity or retreat to self-protection. Ivy's mother had 18 months from diagnosis to death. The best 18 months of our lives, despite everything, because we knew they mattered. Don't take away Ivy's choice to care about you just because the ending's uncertain. She's braver than that. So am I. Claire felt tears threaten, but they weren't entirely sad. "It's not fair to either of you." "Fair," Ethan laughed, but not unkindly. "Fair disappeared when my 32-year-old wife got cancer. Fair has nothing to do with any of this, but connection, hope, small moments of grace like tonight, that's what we have instead of fair." Before Claire could respond, rain finally began to fall. Not the threatened storm, but a gentle shower that brought out the smell of earth and growing things. "I should go," Claire said, though leaving felt like tearing away from warmth she'd forgotten existed. "Text me when you get home," Ethan said, "so I know you made it safe." It was such a simple request, but it implied continuity, someone waiting on the other end to know she was okay. Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. As she drove away, she saw them in her rearview mirror, Ethan and Ivy on the porch, waving in the rain like a scene from someone else's life, someone who had a future worth believing in. Her phone buzzed at a red light, a text from Ivy sent from Ethan's phone. "The Guardian is already working. I can feel her protecting me. Thank you for the magic, Miss Claire. Love, Ivy." Claire sat at the light even after it turned green, tears finally coming. Not from sadness, but from something more complex. She'd walked into that house carrying a painting and walked out carrying possibility. The weight of it was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. That night, unable to sleep, she began a new painting. Not for money, not for survival, but for the simple joy of creation. It was a house, yellow Victorian with gingerbread trim, a father and daughter on the porch, and above them, almost invisible unless you knew to look, a guardian unicorn dragon keeping watch. The next Friday came faster than Claire expected, marked by another round of chemotherapy that left her weaker than before. She'd almost canceled dinner with the Hayes family, but Ivy had called that morning. Ethan had taught her how to use his phone for emergencies, and apparently ensuring Claire's attendance at tamale night qualified. "Please come, Miss Claire," the child had pleaded. "I made you something special, and Dad bought the good tamales from the place Mom liked." So Claire found herself once again at their yellow Victorian, though this time Ethan met her at the car, noting how she gripped the door frame when standing. "Bad week?" he asked quietly, offering his arm. "They're all bad weeks lately," Claire admitted, accepting his support without the usual protest. 3 weeks of knowing the Hayes family had worn down her walls against accepting help. Inside, Ivy had transformed the dining room into what she called an art gallery, with Claire's paintings displayed alongside her own drawings. She'd made little museum labels for each piece, written in her careful 9-year-old handwriting. "Look," Ivy said proudly, pointing to the label under Claire's bluebonnet field. "Bluebonnet Dreams by Miss Claire Dawson. This painting makes people think of spring and mothers and Texas all at once." Claire's throat tightened at the child's intuitive understanding of what she'd tried to capture. Dinner conversation flowed around Claire's exhaustion, Ethan and Ivy carrying the weight of it while including her without demanding participation. It was a kindness she'd never experienced before, being allowed to exist in a space without having to perform wellness. "Miss Claire looks tired, Dad," Ivy observed with a child's blunt honesty. "I am tired," Claire admitted, too exhausted to pretend otherwise. "Then you should stay here tonight," Ivy declared as if it were the most logical solution in the world. "We have a guest room. It has good pillows and everything." "Ivy," Ethan started, but Claire saw something in his eyes that suggested he'd been thinking the same thing. "I couldn't impose," Claire said automatically. "It's not imposing if we're inviting you," Ivy countered with 9-year-old logic. "Besides, I want to show you my glow-in-the-dark paint in the morning. It only works when it's dark first, then light." Claire looked at Ethan, who nodded slightly. "The guest room's always ready," he said simply. "And I'd feel better knowing you didn't have to drive home exhausted." That night, Claire slept in a bed that didn't sag in the middle, in a room that smelled like lavender instead of medical disinfectant, with the sound of a family existing gently around her. She woke once to hear Ethan checking on Ivy, their voices soft through the walls, talking about stars and guardian dragons, and whether Claire liked chocolate chip pancakes. Morning brought those promised pancakes and Ivy's glow-in-the-dark paint demonstration, which involved turning off all the lights in her room and revealing a ceiling covered in constellations she'd painted herself. "Mom taught me the real ones," Ivy explained in the darkness, her voice taking on a reverent quality. "But I added some of my own. That one's the unicorn dragon constellation. I put it right above my bed next to the painting you made." When Ethan drove Claire home later that morning, he brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said carefully. "The medical bills, the treatments, selling paintings on the street. It's not sustainable." "I know," Claire said quietly, watching Austin pass by outside the window. "I've done the math. I have maybe 2 months before I can't afford treatment anymore." "What if there was another way?" Claire turned to look at him, seeing determination mixed with something else. Hope, maybe. Or just stubbornness in the face of impossible odds. My company renovates houses, but we also work with commercial spaces. We're finishing a project downtown, a law firm that wants local art for their offices. They've got a budget, a real one. And my friend Marcus owns a gallery in the arts district. He owes me a favor from when I renovated his space for cost. Ethan, I can't. You can, he interrupted gently. This isn't charity, Claire. Your art is extraordinary. Anyone who sees it knows that. Let me introduce you to Marcus at least. See what he says. Claire wanted to refuse, to maintain the fiction that she could handle this alone, but Ivy's voice echoed in her mind talking about the unicorn dragon constellation she'd created. Sometimes surviving meant accepting that you couldn't guard all the spaces anymore. Okay, she whispered. Marcus Delgado turned out to be a force of nature in designer jeans and a vintage Austin City Limits t-shirt. He took one look at Claire's portfolio. Ethan had insisted on photographing all her work, and immediately started talking about wall space and opening nights. This water series, Marcus said, spreading out prints of Claire's paintings on his gallery's massive wooden table. The way you capture light through liquid, it's phenomenal. And this piece? He held up a photo of the ruined sunset painting Ethan had bought that first day. Tell me about this. It was destroyed, Claire said. Coffee spilled on it. Ethan bought it anyway. Because I could see what it was meant to be, Ethan added from where he stood by the window, Ivy spinning in circles in the gallery's open space. Marcus studied the photo more carefully. The destruction is part of it now. The way the colors bled, the tears in the paper. It's like viewing beauty through loss. We could build an entire show around that concept. I don't have enough pieces for a show, Claire said, even as her heart raced at the possibility. How many can you create in 6 weeks? 6 weeks? Claire's mind calculated treatment schedules, energy levels, the brutal mathematics of creation versus survival. The gallery has an opening in 6 weeks, a cancellation. It's fate. Marcus's enthusiasm was infectious, but Claire felt the weight of reality pressing down. I have chemotherapy twice a week. Some days I can't even hold a brush steady. Marcus and Ethan exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between old friends. Then we work around that, Marcus said simply. You paint when you can. Whatever you produce, we show. Even if it's just 10 pieces, we make it work. Dad, look! Ivy called from across the gallery. They have a spot perfect for Miss Claire's guardian painting. That's actually for our featured artist wall, Marcus explained, then paused. Wait, you painted something for Ivy? Ethan pulled out his phone, showing Marcus the photo of the unicorn dragon guardian. Marcus's eyebrows rose. Claire, this is next level. The detail, the emotion, the mythological elements. We could build the entire show around this theme, Guardians and Grace or something like that. Beauty in the ruins, Ivy suggested, having danced her way back to the table, because Miss Claire makes beautiful things even when everything is ruined. The adults fell silent, the profundity of the child's words settling over them like dust motes in gallery light. Beauty in the ruins, Marcus repeated slowly. That's actually perfect. The next 6 weeks transformed into a blur of creation and destruction, painting and treatment, hope and exhaustion dancing together in a complicated waltz. Claire moved her makeshift studio to Ethan's garage. He'd insisted after finding her passed out over a painting in her apartment, too weak to make it to her bed. It's practical, he'd argued when she protested. You can paint when you feel able, rest when you need to, and Ivy can bring you snacks every 5 minutes like she wants to. The garage had been transformed into an artist's haven, proper lighting, ventilation for the paint fumes, a comfortable chair for when standing became too much. Elena's poetry journals sat on a shelf, and sometimes Claire read them during breaks, finding kinship with another woman who'd faced mortality with grace. Ivy became her constant companion after school, working on her own art while Claire painted. The child had an intuitive understanding of when to chatter and when to be quiet, when Claire needed distraction and when she needed focus. Are you scared? Ivy asked one afternoon, apropos of nothing, her face serious as she watched Claire's hands shake while mixing colors. Yes, Claire answered honestly. She'd learned that Ivy could handle truth better than pretty lies. Mom was scared too, but she said being scared and being brave aren't opposites. They're dance partners. Your mom sounds very wise. She was. Dad says I got her heart and his hard head. Ivy grinned, then grew serious again. I'm glad you're here, Miss Claire. Even if you have to leave like Mom did. The time matters. Claire set down her brush and pulled the child into a hug, feeling Ivy's small arms wrap around her with fierce affection. The time matters, she agreed, breathing in Ivy's shampoo and tempera paint scent. It all matters. The paintings that emerged over those 6 weeks were unlike anything Claire had created before. They were rawer, more honest, infused with an urgency that came from knowing time was finite. The Guardian series grew. Protectors for different fears, different losses. A phoenix wolf for those rising from ashes. A butterfly bear for transformation through hibernation. Each mythical creature held space for both power and vulnerability. Ethan often worked nearby, ostensibly on his laptop, but really keeping watch. He'd learned to read her body's signals sometimes better than she could, bringing water before she realized she was dehydrated, suggesting breaks before exhaustion took hold, simply being present when the fear grew too loud. One evening, 3 weeks before the show, Claire's latest blood work came back worse than expected. The experimental treatment was failing. Dr. Morrison, her oncologist, suggested aggressive radiation, but the cost was astronomical and the chances slim. Claire sat in Ethan's kitchen, the papers spread before her like tarot cards predicting a future she couldn't accept. How much? Ethan asked quietly. Ivy was at a sleepover, the house unusually quiet without her constant energy. $40,000 for the full course. Insurance might cover 10. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, then stood and retrieved something from his office. A folder, thick with documents. Elena had life insurance, he said, sitting back down. I never touched it. Couldn't. It felt like admitting she was really gone, but she wrote me a letter to read when I was ready. He pulled out a handwritten page, Elena's careful script visible. She said to use it for something that mattered, something that would make Ivy proud, something that honored the belief that life is always worth fighting for. Ethan, no. Yes, he said firmly. This matters. You matter. To Ivy, to me, to everyone who'll see your art. Elena would understand. She'd probably be angry I waited this long. Claire stared at the papers, the numbers, the possibility of time that seemed impossible moments before. I can't take your wife's insurance money. You're not taking anything. We're investing in hope. There's a difference. What if it doesn't work? What if you waste all that money and I die anyway? Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand. His fingers were warm, calloused, steady. Then we'll have tried. Then Ivy will know we did everything possible. Then your paintings will exist in the world, proof that beauty persists despite everything. It's not a waste. It's a choice to believe in tomorrow. Claire found herself crying, ugly sobs that shook her thin frame. Ethan moved around the table, pulling her against him, holding her while she broke apart. He smelled like sawdust and coffee, like safety she hadn't known she'd been seeking. Let us help you, he whispered into her hair. Let us be your guardians for a while. The next morning, Claire woke in the guest room to find Ivy sitting at the foot of her bed, watching her with those two wise eyes. Dad told me about the new treatment, Ivy said. He said it's expensive, but that Mom would want us to help. Ivy, I talk to Mom sometimes, the child interrupted. Not like she answers or anything. I'm not crazy. But I tell her things. I told her about you. I said you were teaching me about art and making Dad smile again, and that you needed help. And then the next day, Dad found Mom's letter about the insurance money. That's not a coincidence. That's Mom helping. Claire sat up, pulling Ivy close. Your mom must have been extraordinary to raise such a wise daughter. She was, and she'd like you. You're both warriors disguised as artists. The new treatment started the next week, the same week Marcus began promoting the show. The gallery's social media filled with previews of Claire's work, and the story began to spread. A young artist fighting cancer while creating beauty, a community rallying around her, art as resistance against mortality. Opening night arrived on a Thursday that couldn't decide between rain and shine, so it did both in alternating waves. Claire stood in the gallery's back room, wearing a dress Ivy had helped her choose, deep blue like her beloved water studies, with a scarf Elena had owned that Ethan insisted she borrow. I can't go out there, she said, panic rising. Through the door, she could hear voices, so many voices, people here to see her work, her soul laid bare on white walls. Yes, you can, Ethan said, adjusting the scarf with gentle fingers. You've faced worse than art critics and collectors. What if they hate it? What if no one buys anything? What if they see what we see? He interrupted. What if your art changes someone's life tonight? What if this is the beginning, not an ending? Ivy burst through the door, wearing a party dress and her biggest smile. Miss Claire, there's so many people. And they're all looking at the Guardian painting and crying, but like good crying. Marcus appeared behind her. We've already sold 6 pieces, and we haven't even done the artist talk yet. Claire, you need to see this. The gallery was packed. Not just polite attendants, but genuine crowds. People stopped in front of each painting, discussing, pointing, feeling. Claire saw her work through their eyes. Not desperate sidewalk offerings, but real art that moved people, that mattered. There she is, someone called out, and suddenly Claire was surrounded by collectors, critics, other artists, all wanting to know about her process, her inspiration, her story. She found herself by the Guardian painting, Ivy's commissioned piece, now the centerpiece of the show, with a small placard reading, "Not for sale," on loan from the collection of Ivy Hayes. This one, a woman with expensive jewelry and kind eyes said, "This one makes me think of my son. He's deployed overseas. Could you create something similar? A guardian for soldiers?" Yes, of course. The commissions began then, one after another. A guardian for a child with autism. A protector for a family rebuilding after a house fire. A mythical creature to watch over a grandmother with Alzheimer's. Each request came with a story, a need for beauty in the face of difficulty. By the evening's end, Claire had sold enough paintings to cover 3 months of treatment. But more than that, she'd found something she'd thought cancer had stolen. Purpose beyond survival, community beyond isolation, future beyond the next treatment. Ethan found her on the gallery's back patio, overwhelmed and exhausted but radiant in a way that had nothing to do with health and everything to do with hope. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have. Without you and Ivy, without Marcus, without you being brave enough to keep painting when everything was falling apart," Ethan finished. "That was all you." They stood close in the Austin night, the gallery lights spilling gold rectangles onto the patio, the sound of continued celebration inside. Claire felt the moment balanced on an edge, poised between what was and what could be. "Ethan," she began, but he shook his head gently. "Not yet," he said softly. "Let's get you healthy first. Let's make sure there's time for everything we're both thinking but not saying. Elena taught me that love isn't about perfect timing. It's about choosing to hope even when the outcome's uncertain. But you need to focus on fighting right now. I'll be here. Ivy'll be here. When you're ready, we'll all still be here." Claire understood. This thing between them, this connection forged in crisis and deepened through shared dinners and garage painting sessions, deserved more than desperate grasping at happiness. It deserved the luxury of time, the possibility of tomorrow. "Dad, Miss Claire!" Ivy appeared in the doorway, bouncing with excitement. "The newspaper wants to interview you both. They're calling it Austin's Art Angel, and they want to know about the Guardians." As Claire walked back into the gallery, flanked by the Hayes family that had somehow become hers, she thought about transformation. How coffee-ruined paintings became symbols of resilience. How sidewalk art became gallery shows. How strangers became family. How dying became living, really living. Not in spite of cancer, but alongside it. The reporter asked her about inspiration, about where the Guardian series came from. Claire looked at Ivy, who was trying very hard to stand still and look serious for the newspaper photographer. She looked at Ethan, steady and present, his brown eyes warm with pride. She thought about Elena's poetry journals and insurance money transformed into treatment, about Marcus taking a chance on an unknown artist, about a community of strangers who'd looked at her art and seen their own need for protection reflected back. "The Guardians came from understanding that we all need protection sometimes," she said. "But more than that, we all have the capacity to be guardians for each other. Art just makes that visible. It shows us that beauty and strength can coexist with fear and fragility. Every painting is both a prayer and a promise that we're not alone in our battles, that someone sees us, that beauty persists even in the ruins. The flash went off, capturing Claire with Ethan and Ivy, three people who'd found each other in loss and chosen to build something new from the wreckage. The photo would run on the front page of the art section with the headline, "Beauty in the Ruins, Local Artist Transforms Cancer Battle into Gallery Triumph." But that was later. In that moment, Claire stood in a gallery filled with her art, surrounded by people who'd become family, feeling the new treatment course through her veins like liquid hope. She wasn't cured, might never be, but she was alive, truly alive, painting guardians for a world that needed them, loved by a child who'd lost her mother and a man who'd lost his wife. All of them proof that broken things could be beautiful, that endings could be beginnings, that sometimes the universe sends exactly the guardian you need, disguised as a stranger in work boots, who stops to help you gather your scattered art off a burning sidewalk. Marcus raised a glass of champagne, the gallery growing quiet for the toast. "To Claire Dawson," he said, "who reminds us that art isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. That beauty isn't separate from suffering, it's our answer to it, and that guardians come in many forms, including watercolor and determination and the courage to keep creating when creation seems impossible." The crowd erupted in approval, glasses raising, but Claire barely heard them. She was watching Ivy, who'd climbed onto a chair to be taller, raising her glass of apple juice with complete seriousness. "To Miss Claire," Ivy added in her clear child's voice that somehow carried over the crowd, "who's teaching me that art is just love wearing colors?" Later, much later, after the gallery had emptied and the paintings had been marked with their red sold dots, after Ivy had fallen asleep in the car and Ethan had carried her into the house, after Claire had taken her nighttime medications and settled into what had become her room at the Hayes house, she pulled out a fresh canvas. This painting would be different. Not for sale, not for show, just for them. It began with three figures, a man, a child, and a woman who was learning to believe in tomorrow. Above them, barely visible unless you knew to look, flew a guardian that looked suspiciously like Elena, wings spread wide enough to shelter new love built on the foundation of old grief. Claire painted through the night, her hands steady despite everything, adding layer after layer of color and meaning. When morning came, bringing Ivy's sleepy face to her doorway asking about breakfast, the painting was finished. "Is that us?" Ivy asked, climbing onto Claire's bed to see better. "It's a possibility," Claire said carefully. Ivy studied the painting with her usual intensity, then looked at Claire with those eyes that saw too much. "Mom would want Dad to be happy again. She'd want me to have someone who understands about art and feelings and making beautiful things when everything hurts." "Ivy, I'm not saying you're replacing her," Ivy continued matter-of-factly. "No one could. But maybe you're not supposed to replace her. Maybe you're supposed to be what comes next. Like when you paint over something, but you can still see the first painting underneath, making the new one richer." Claire pulled the child close, thinking about palimpsests and layered paint, about lives built on top of loss, about the way love didn't erase what came before but added to it, creating depth and texture that couldn't exist any other way. "You're pretty smart for 9, Claire said. "I'll be 10 next month," Ivy announced. "Dad's planning a party. You'll be there, right?" It was a simple question that contained multitudes, assumptions about survival, about belonging, about futures that stretched beyond treatment schedules and blood counts. "I'll be there," Claire promised, and for the first time since her diagnosis, she actually believed it. The morning of Ivy's 10th birthday arrived with unexpected test results. Claire sat in Dr. Morrison's office, staring at the scans that showed something impossible. The tumors were shrinking, not dramatically, not miraculously, but measurably, undeniably shrinking. "The new treatment is working better than we hoped," Dr. Morrison said, his usually cautious demeanor cracking to reveal genuine optimism. "You're not in remission yet, but Claire, this is significant progress." Claire's hand shook as she held the images, these glimpses into her body's secret battle. 3 months of the aggressive treatment funded by Elena's insurance money, 3 months of fighting with everything she had, and finally, her body was winning ground instead of losing it. She drove straight to the Hayes house, where birthday preparations were in full swing. Ethan was on a ladder, hanging streamers in Ivy's requested color scheme, purple, silver, and what she called dragon gold. He took one look at Claire's face and nearly fell off the ladder. "The tumors are shrinking," she said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. Ethan was off the ladder and across the yard before she could say more, pulling her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the ground. He was crying, she realized, his shoulders shaking with the kind of relief that comes from holding your breath for months and finally being able to exhale. "Tell Ivy," he whispered against her hair. Best birthday present she could get. They found Ivy in her room, carefully arranging her art supplies. She'd asked for nothing but art materials for her birthday, declaring she wanted to be just like Miss Claire when she grew up. "Birthday girl," Claire said from the doorway. "I have some news." Ivy looked up, paintbrush in hand, purple paint already somehow in her hair despite the party being hours away. "The medicine is working. I'm getting better," brush in hand, purple paint already somehow in her hair despite the party being hours away. "The medicine is working. I'm getting better." The paintbrush clattered to the floor as Ivy launched herself at Claire, all knobby elbows and fierce love. "I knew it! I told the Guardian every night to help you fight, and she did. She did." The party that afternoon was a celebration on multiple levels. 20 children descended on the Hayes backyard, but also Marcus, several collectors from the gallery show, and a surprising number of people whose lives had been touched by Claire's Guardian paintings. The woman whose son was deployed had commissioned a piece and came to show photos of him with the painting in his barracks. The family rebuilding after the fire brought their daughter, who clutched a small print of her Phoenix Guardian. Claire watched it all from the porch, still weak from treatment but filled with a different kind of energy. Ethan appeared beside her with a plate of cake, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. "Ivy's wish when she blew out the candles," he said quietly, "was for you to stay." "Ethan, I know we said we'd wait, but Claire, these last months, you've become part of us. Not because you're sick, not because we feel sorry for you, but because you fit, like you were always supposed to be here." Claire turned to look at him, this man who'd saved her art from a coffee puddle, who'd opened his home and his daughter's heart, who'd spent his wife's insurance money on keeping her alive without a moment's hesitation. "I love you," she said simply. "Both of you. I love the way Ivy sees the world in colors and the way you rebuild broken houses and broken people with the same careful hands. I love Friday dinners and garage painting sessions and even the way you burn cookies." "Every single time," Ethan agreed with a wet laugh. "Elena tried to teach me, but some things are beyond hope." "But not us," Claire said, reaching for his hand. "We're not beyond hope." He kissed her then, there on the porch, with children shrieking in the yard, and Ivy definitely watching from the window, a kiss that tasted like birthday cake, and promises, and the peculiar sweetness of futures that almost weren't. "Gross!" Ivy yelled from inside, but she was grinning when they broke apart. "Does this mean Miss Claire is staying forever?" "If she'll have us," Ethan called back. "Forever's a long time," Claire warned, though she was smiling. "I'm still sick. The treatment's working, but there's no guarantee." "There never is," Ethan interrupted. "Even healthy people don't get guarantees, but whatever time we get, I want to spend it with you. Ivy wants to spend it with you. We want to be your family, Claire, in whatever form that takes, for however long we're given." That night, after the guests had gone and Ivy had crashed from her birthday sugar high, Claire found herself in Elena's studio. Ethan had never changed it, keeping it as a shrine to his late wife's poetry. But tonight, he'd brought Claire here deliberately. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling out one of Elena's journals. "She wrote this a week before she died." The handwriting was shaky, but determined. "Ethan, my love, you will mourn me. That's good and right. But then you will heal, and one day you will meet someone who makes you remember that life is for living. When that happens, don't hesitate. Don't feel guilty. Love her with the same whole heart you loved me. Show Ivy that love isn't limited, that hearts expand rather than replace. Be happy, my darling. Be so magnificently happy that when we meet again and whatever comes after, you can tell me stories that will make me glad I let you go." Claire wiped tears from her cheeks. She was remarkable. She was, and she would have adored you, two artists recognizing each other across the divide. Ethan set the journal down carefully. "I want to turn this into a shared studio. Your paintings, her poetry, Ivy's experiments. A family space instead of a shrine. Are you sure? Elena believed in living fully. Keeping this room frozen in time isn't living, it's just existing. She'd want it filled with creation again. They spent the next week transforming the space. Ethan built new shelving and installed better lighting while Claire organized supplies and created work areas. Ivy contributed by painting a mural on one wall, a fantastical landscape where unicorn dragons flew alongside phoenixes and butterfly bears, where the sun and moon shared the same sky, where everything broken was also beautiful. The studio's transformation coincided with Claire's continued improvement. Each scan showed more progress, tumors shrinking like ice in spring. Dr. Morrison started using words like remarkable and exceptional response. The experimental treatment was working better than anyone had dared hope. 6 months after that first encounter on the sidewalk, Claire stood in the same spot on South Congress where she'd once sold paintings in desperation. But this time, she wasn't alone. Ethan and Ivy were with her, setting up for what Ivy had dubbed Art in the Wild, a public painting demonstration to raise funds for cancer patients who couldn't afford treatment. "This is where we met," Claire told the small crowd that had gathered, curious about the painters taking over the sidewalk corner. "I was dying then, in all the ways a person can die: body, spirit, hope. A stranger stopped to help me collect my scattered paintings, and that small kindness became the first brushstroke in a completely different picture." She began painting as she talked, her hands steady and sure now, creating a new guardian on canvas while people watched. This one was different from the others. Instead of a single mythical creature, it was a collection of small, ordinary things transformed into protectors. Coffee stains that became wings, scattered papers that assembled into armor, broken pieces that formed a mosaic shield. "We all have the power to be guardians," she explained as she painted. "Sometimes it's as simple as stopping when everyone else walks by. Sometimes it's opening your home to someone who needs shelter. Sometimes it's believing in someone's art, their worth, their future, when they can't believe in it themselves." Ethan worked beside her, teaching kids in the crowd basic painting techniques, while Ivy distributed art supplies they'd bought with proceeds from Claire's recent sales. The afternoon sun beat down just as it had 6 months ago, but everything else had changed. Marcus arrived with news that made Claire's brush pause mid-stroke. "The Museum of Fine Arts wants to acquire 3 pieces from your Guardian series for their permanent collection." "What?" Claire stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You heard me. Permanent collection. They're particularly interested in the piece about transformation through destruction, the coffee-stained sunset. They're calling it a metaphor for resilience in contemporary American art." Ivy, who'd been eavesdropping with the subtlety of a 10-year-old, started jumping up and down. "Miss Claire's going to be in a museum, like forever. People will see her paintings hundreds of years from now." The weight of that hit Claire suddenly. Permanence, legacy. Her art outlasting her body regardless of what the cancer did. She'd been so focused on surviving that she'd forgotten about transcending. "There's more," Marcus continued, grinning now. "They want to commission a large-scale piece for their main atrium. The theme is Austin's creative spirit. Full funding, 18 months to complete, and Claire, they're talking about a solo exhibition next year." Claire felt Ethan's hand find hers, grounding her as the world tilted with possibility. 6 months ago, she'd been calculating how many paintings she needed to sell to afford one more treatment. Now, museums wanted her work, collectors sought her out, and she had time, blessed, impossible time, to create. That evening, they celebrated at the Hayes house with tamales from Elena's favorite place and a cake that Ethan definitely hadn't attempted to make himself. Claire had officially moved in the month before, her few possessions finding homes among the Hayes family's life. Her easel stood in the shared studio, her paintings hung throughout the house, her presence woven into their daily routine so completely it was hard to remember a time when she hadn't been there. "I have something to tell you both," Claire said as they sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the humid evening air. "Dr. Morrison used a word today I haven't heard before. Remission. Not complete, not yet, but partial remission. The tumors aren't just shrinking anymore. Some of them are gone." Ivy abandoned her dignified 10-year-old composure, throwing herself at Claire with a whoop of joy. Ethan wrapped his arms around both of them, his face buried in Claire's hair, whispering, "Thank you," over and over, whether to God, the universe, Elena, or Claire herself, she wasn't sure. "Does this mean you're cured?" Ivy asked, pulling back to study Claire's face with those penetrating eyes. "Not cured?" Claire said honestly. "Maybe never completely cured, but managed, controlled, like having diabetes or any other chronic condition. I'll need treatment and monitoring forever, but Ivy, I get to have a forever now." The child nodded solemnly, processing this. "So you'll be here for my middle school graduation? And high school? And when I become a famous artist too?" "All of it," Claire promised. "Every moment I can grab, I'll be here." Later, after Ivy had gone to bed, Claire and Ethan sat on the porch swing Elena had picked out years ago, moving gently in the evening breeze. "I want to marry you," Ethan said suddenly, then laughed at himself. "That wasn't how I planned to say it. I had a whole speech about time and second chances and—" "Yes," Claire interrupted. "I haven't even asked properly." "Then ask." Ethan slid off the swing and onto one knee right there on the back porch with paint under his fingernails and sawdust in his hair. "Claire Dawson, you've taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless, that beauty exists especially in the ruins, that love isn't about perfect timing, but about choosing to hope even when the outcome's uncertain. Will you marry me and officially join this beautifully imperfect family?" "Yes," she said again, pulling him up for a kiss that tasted like survival and joy, and the future she'd almost lost. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "I wanted to ask first, then let you choose something you'd actually want to wear while painting." "I don't need a ring. I have everything I need." "You say that now, but Ivy's going to insist on being involved in ring shopping. Prepare yourself for opinions. So many opinions." They told Ivy the next morning over breakfast. Ethan's pancakes and Claire's fruit salad and coffee, strong enough to fuel art and renovation alike. "Finally!" Ivy exclaimed, then paused. "Wait, does this mean Miss Claire becomes Mom Claire?" The question hung in the air, delicate and important. Claire reached across the table for Ivy's hand. "I become whatever you want me to become," she said carefully. "I'm not trying to replace your mom, Ivy. No one could. But I love you like you're my own, and I'd be honored to be any kind of mom you'll let me be." Ivy considered this with her characteristic intensity. Mom Elena and Mom Claire. Two moms, one who gave me life and one who's teaching me how to live it. "That's beautiful, baby," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," Ivy said matter-of-factly. "I'm an artist. We're good with words and feelings." The wedding planning became a family affair, with Ivy appointing herself creative director and insisting on a theme that combined guardians, paint, and what she called Austin Weird. Claire continued her treatments, continued painting, continued building a life that felt like a miracle made of small daily choices to keep going. The museum piece took shape in the studio, a massive canvas depicting Austin's creative spirit as a living entity, part music, part paint, part taco truck, part bat colony, wholly impossible and perfectly true. She worked on it between commissioned guardians, between treatments, between family dinners and Ivy's art lessons, and quiet mornings with Ethan before the world woke up. One afternoon, while adding details to the museum piece, Claire felt a presence in the studio. Not supernatural, just the weight of being watched. She turned to find a woman standing in the doorway, mid-40s, elegant, with eyes that looked familiar. "I'm Rosa," the woman said. "Elena's sister." Claire's brush clattered to the floor. In all the months with the Hayes family, Elena's relatives had been notably absent, a wound Ethan didn't discuss. "I saw the article," Rosa continued, "about your exhibition, about you and Ethan and Ivy. I came to see for myself." "Rosa, You're not what I expected," Rosa interrupted, but her tone wasn't unkind. "When I heard Ethan was with someone new, someone young and blonde and artistic, I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. But then I saw your paintings, the Guardians. And I understood." She moved into the studio, drawn to the mural Ivy had painted on the wall. "She's happy. Ivy. I can see it in these colors, in the photos from the article. She's happy in a way she hasn't been since Elena." "She's an extraordinary child," Claire said carefully. "She's Elena's child, and now yours too, I think." Rosa turned to face Claire directly. Elena would have liked you. You fight like she did, not just against the disease, but for beauty, for meaning, for love, in the middle of loss. I'm not trying to replace. No, Rosa agreed. You're not replacing. You're continuing. There's a difference. She pulled something from her bag, a small canvas wrapped in tissue. Elena painted this right after Ivy was born. I thought you should have it. Claire unwrapped it carefully. It was a watercolor, amateur but passionate, depicting a woman holding a baby while surrounded by guardian angels that looked suspiciously like the creatures Claire had been painting. She believed in guardians too, Rosa said softly. Perhaps that's why you found this family, or why they found you. Rosa stayed for coffee, then dinner, then became part of the expanding circle of family that grew around Claire, Ethan, and Ivy like ripples in water. She brought Elena's parents the next visit, elderly and careful, but warming to Claire when they saw how Ivy bloomed in her presence. She paints like Elena wrote, Elena's mother said in Spanish, which Claire was learning with Ethan and Ivy's enthusiastic help. From the heart, without fear. The wedding date was set for spring, a year to the day after Claire's first gallery opening. The treatments continued to work, each scan showing improvement, Dr. Morrison finally comfortable using the word that had seemed impossible. Stable. Not cured, but stable. Managed. Livable. Winter came gentle to Austin that year, and Claire spent it finishing the museum piece and preparing for a spring that promised everything she'd thought she'd never have. Ivy worked beside her on her own paintings, developing a style that was uniquely hers, part Claire's technical influence, part Elena's emotional legacy, wholly Ivy's voice. Do you think Mom Elena can see us? Ivy asked one evening as they painted together, Ethan reading in the corner, the studio warm with purpose and presence. I don't know, Claire answered honestly. But I think love like your mom's doesn't just disappear. It transforms, like energy. Maybe it's in how your dad knows exactly when I need water during treatment. Maybe it's in how you see beauty everywhere. Maybe it's in how 3 broken people found each other and made something whole. Like your paintings, Ivy said, understanding immediately. Beautiful because of the broken parts, not despite them. Exactly like that. The museum unveiled Claire's piece in March, a gala event that felt surreal even as it happened. Claire stood before the massive canvas, Ethan on one side, Ivy on the other, watching strangers encounter her vision of Austin's creative spirit. The guardian elements were subtle but present. Protective wings in the shape of clouds, fierce eyes in the windows of painted buildings, the whole city rendered as a living entity that sheltered its artists. Your artist's statement, a critic said, approaching with a recorder. You wrote that art is both prayer and promise. Can you elaborate? Claire thought about her journey from that scorching sidewalk to this climate-controlled museum, from scattered paintings to permanent collections, from dying alone to living surrounded by love. Every piece of art is a prayer that beauty matters, she said, finding words she didn't know she had. And it's a promise that we'll keep creating even when creation seems impossible, especially then. The guardians I paint, they're not separate from us. They're us, choosing to protect and celebrate and transform and survive. And the cancer? The critic asked delicately. How does that influence your work? Cancer taught me urgency, Claire said simply. Not to wait for perfect conditions to create. Not to postpone love because the ending's uncertain. Cancer is part of my story, but it's not my whole story. I'm an artist who happens to have cancer, not a cancer patient who happens to paint. The critic nodded, scribbling notes, but Ivy tugged on Claire's dress. Tell them about the magic, she whispered loudly. The magic? The critic asked, amused. Art is love-wearing colors, Claire said, quoting Ivy's perfect description. And love. Love is the most powerful guardian of all. The review that ran in the paper called Claire's work transcendent, but she barely noticed. She was too busy living, painting commissions, teaching Ivy advanced techniques, planning a wedding that kept growing as more and more people wanted to celebrate this unlikely love story, this family built on the ruins of loss. 2 weeks before the wedding, Claire got news that made her hands shake. Not bad news, the opposite. The experimental treatment had been so successful in her case that she was being featured in medical journals. Her oncologist wanted her to speak at conferences. She'd become the rare success story, the outlier who survived. I don't want to be a poster child, she told Ethan that night, anxiety rippling through her. Then don't be, he said simply. You're already doing the work, showing people that life continues, that beauty persists. Your paintings say more than any conference speech could. But Claire thought about all the people sitting where she'd sat, calculating impossible math, selling everything just for another week of life. Maybe I could do both, paint and speak, show them it's possible. The guardian of hope, Ivy said from the doorway, clearly eavesdropping again. That's what you'd be. Spring arrived with bluebonnets and the wedding day that had once seemed impossible. Claire stood in Elena's sister Rosa's house, letting Elena's mother pin flowers in her hair while Ivy spun in her flower girl dress, declaring herself the most artistic wedding participant ever. You're radiant, Rosa said, adjusting Claire's simple dress. She'd chosen something she could move in, dance in, paint in, if necessary. I'm terrified, Claire admitted. Good, Elena's mother said in careful English. Scared and brave, they danced together, yes? The ceremony was in Ethan's backyard, transformed with lights and flowers and Ivy's artistic touches everywhere. Marcus officiated. He'd gotten ordained online specifically for this. The gallery community filled the chairs, along with other cancer survivors Claire had met through treatment, the Hayes renovation crew, and the growing circle of family that had embraced this unlikely love story. But Claire only had eyes for Ethan, standing under an arbor he'd built himself, looking at her like she was every answered prayer he'd never dared to pray. You found me, she whispered when she reached him, taking his calloused hands. We found each other, he corrected. The vows were simple, honest, acknowledging the complexity of second chances and blended families and futures that remained uncertain despite remission. I promise to love you through treatment and triumph, Ethan said, his voice steady. To be your guardian when you need protection and your partner when you need an equal. To honor the journey that brought you to us while building new paths together. I promise to paint our life in all its colors, Claire responded, even the dark ones, especially the broken ones. To love you and Ivy with the urgency of someone who knows how precious time is. To be a guardian for this family we're creating, this beautiful, impossible, perfect family. Ivy stood between them, holding the rings on a pillow she'd painted herself with tiny guardians. When it came time for family vows, she spoke clear and strong. I promise to share my dad with you and my art supplies, even the good ones. To remember that you're not replacing Mom Elena, but adding to our family like adding colors to a painting. To love you even when you're sick, especially when you're scared, and always when you're painting. There wasn't a dry eye in the yard. The reception was pure Austin. Tacos from 3 different trucks, Marcus DJing with questionable skill but excellent enthusiasm, and easels set up for anyone who wanted to paint. The museum piece had inspired a trend, and Claire found herself teaching impromptu lessons between dances, her wedding dress splattered with paint by the end of the night. No regrets? Ethan asked as they swayed to a slow song, Ivy having long ago crashed in Rosa's lap. Only one, Claire said. I wish I'd fallen in front of you sooner. Then we might not have been ready. The timing was perfect, broken perfect, but perfect. As if to prove his point, Ivy stirred, stumbling over to join their dance, the 3 of them swaying together under string lights and stars, a family forged in loss and found in love. The honeymoon was supposed to be simple, a long weekend in Marfa, Texas, where Claire could paint the desert light and Ethan could explore the minimalist architecture. But 2 days before they were set to leave, Claire's routine scan showed something that made Dr. Morrison's face tighten in a way she'd learned to fear. It's not the lymphoma, he said quickly, seeing her expression. The cancer is still in remission, but Claire, we're seeing some unusual activity in your bone marrow. It could be nothing, a side effect of the aggressive treatment, or it could be the early stages of a secondary cancer. The word hung in the sterile air of the examination room like a poisonous cloud. Secondary cancer. The treatment that had saved her might have planted seeds for something else. How long until we know? Ethan asked, his hand finding Claire's, steady despite the tremor she felt in her own fingers. We need to do a bone marrow biopsy. I can schedule it for Monday. That's our honeymoon, Claire said numbly. Go, Dr. Morrison said, surprising them. Take your weekend. The results won't be ready for a week anyway. Go live, Claire. That's what you've been fighting for. They drove to Marfa and Ethan's truck, Ivy staying with Rosa, the desert opening up around them like a promise of space to breathe. Claire painted every sunrise and sunset, creating a series she would later call Light Studies in Uncertain Time. Ethan held her when she cried, made love to her under stars so bright they seemed fake, and never once suggested they talk about what might be coming. Are you angry? Claire asked on their last morning, watching the sun transform the desert into gold. No, Ethan said simply. I knew what I was signing up for. Life without guarantees, time measured in moments rather than years. I'd choose it again, Claire. I'd choose you every single time. The biopsy results came back inconclusive. Not cancer, but not normal either. Watchful waiting, Dr. Morrison called it, which Claire thought was just a medical way of saying living with a sword over your head. She threw herself into painting with renewed urgency. The museum had commissioned another piece, and private collectors were calling constantly. But more importantly, Ivy had asked for art lessons, real ones, with technique and theory and all the things Claire had learned in art school before cancer rewrote her story. Today we're learning about negative space, Claire announced one afternoon in the studio, Ivy perched on a stool with her serious artist face on. What's that? The space around and between things. Sometimes what's not there is as important as what is. Ivy considered this, then began painting with new awareness, leaving strategic gaps that somehow made her subjects more defined. She had real talent, Claire realized, not just enthusiasm, but genuine artistic vision inherited from both her mothers, Elena's emotional depth and Claire's developing technical skill. 3 months into the watchful waiting, Claire started feeling tired again. Not the normal exhaustion that had become her baseline, but something deeper, more insistent. She hid it for 2 weeks, not wanting to worry Ethan or disrupt Ivy's upcoming school art show where she would display her Guardian series inspired by Claire's work. But bodies keep their own truth, and hers betrayed her at the worst possible moment. She collapsed at Ivy's art show, in front of all the parents and children, her legs simply refusing to hold her weight anymore. The ambulance ride was a blur of Ivy's tears and Ethan's forced calm. The emergency room was familiar territory by now. Nurses who knew her name, doctors who read her extensive history with growing concern. The bone marrow issue has progressed, Dr. Morrison explained after a battery of tests. It's not cancer, but it's affecting your blood cell production. We're seeing severe anemia, low platelet count. Your bone marrow is struggling, probably from the aggressive treatment that saved you from lymphoma. So the cure is killing me differently? Claire asked with bitter humor. The cure gave you 2 years you wouldn't have had. Now we adapt. There are treatments, transfusions for now, possibly a bone marrow transplant if we can find a match. The testing began immediately. Ethan wasn't a match. They'd known it was unlikely, but had hoped anyway. Rosa tested. Elena's parents, even Marcus and several of the collectors who'd become friends. No matches. Claire spent more time in the hospital than out over the next month, receiving transfusions that temporarily boosted her blood counts only to watch them crash again. She painted from her hospital bed, smaller pieces now, intimate watercolors of the view from her window, the IV drip, Ivy's face when she visited every day after school. I'm scared, Ivy admitted one afternoon, curled up in the hospital bed beside Claire while Ethan talked to doctors in the hallway. Me too, Claire said, holding the girl closer. But you're still painting. Being scared doesn't mean we stop creating. Sometimes it means we create harder, faster, with more purpose. Like Mom Elena's poems at the end. Dad showed me. They were different, more urgent. Claire thought about Elena's journals, the ones she'd read in the studio, how the poetry had shifted as death approached, becoming rawer, more essential. Your mom Elena and I have something in common, Claire said carefully. We both love you and your dad more than we fear what's coming. But I don't want another mom to die, Ivy whispered, the words she'd been holding back for weeks finally escaping. Claire's heart broke a little more, if such a thing was possible. Then I'll have to fight harder, won't I? And you know what? I have something Elena didn't have. What? You. A 10-year-old artist who believes in guardians and magic. That's powerful medicine, Ivy Hayes. That night, unable to sleep, Claire started a new painting. It was different from her usual work, darker, more abstract, but with veins of gold running through the darkness like hope, refusing to be extinguished. She was so absorbed she didn't notice the nurse entering until the woman gasped. "That's beautiful," the nurse said. "What do you call it?" Claire studied the piece, seeing in it her whole journey, the sidewalk collapse, the gallery triumph, the wedding joy. This new battle. "Transformation number 7, she said, thinking of all the times she'd been remade by circumstances. The nurse was young, maybe mid-20s, with kind eyes that reminded Claire of herself before diagnosis. "My brother's an artist," she said. "Was an artist. Leukemia 2 years ago." "I'm sorry." "He painted until the end, said art was proof that humans are more than just biology, that we create meaning even when meaning seems impossible." The nurse adjusted Claire's IV with practiced gentleness. "I tested for bone marrow donation for him. Wasn't a match, but I stayed on the registry." Something in her tone made Claire look up sharply. "The registry?" "The National Marrow Registry. Once you're tested, you stay in the system. I got a call yesterday about a potential match. They won't tell me who, but the timing—" She gestured at Claire's chart. "Are you looking for a donor?" Claire's hand started shaking. "Yes. No matches yet." The nurse, her badge said Sarah, smiled. "Then maybe my brother's sending you a guardian. He believed in those too." The testing and verification took 2 weeks, the longest 2 weeks of Claire's life, but when Dr. Morrison walked into her hospital room with an expression she'd never seen before, pure, uncomplicated joy, she knew before he spoke. "We found your match. Sarah, the nurse from the night shift. She's a perfect match, Claire. As close to identical as non-relatives can be." Ethan was crying, Ivy was jumping on the bed despite the rules, and Claire found herself laughing and sobbing simultaneously. Sarah appeared in the doorway, off shift but unable to stay away. "My brother would have loved this," she said. "Art-saving art." The transplant process was brutal. First came the conditioning, chemotherapy so intense it would destroy Claire's existing bone marrow entirely, leaving her without immune system, without the ability to produce blood cells, completely vulnerable. Then would come the transplant itself, Sarah's healthy marrow hopefully taking root in Claire's depleted body. "You could die from the treatment," Dr. Morrison explained with his characteristic directness. "The mortality rate for this procedure is significant, but without it, I die anyway, just slower," Claire finished. "When?" 2 weeks. We need to get your strength up as much as possible first. 2 weeks to paint, to love, to exist in the world before entering a sterile bubble where even Ivy wouldn't be able to touch her for fear of infection." Claire approached it like she'd approached every challenge since that day on the sidewalk, with art. She painted constantly, creating a body of work she called love letters in color. Each piece was for someone specific: Ivy, Ethan, Rosa, Marcus, even Elena, whose memory had become a strange sort of friend. But the largest piece was for Sarah, the stranger whose brother's death had led to Claire's possible salvation. It was a massive canvas depicting 2 artists painting the same scene from different angles, their brushstrokes meeting in the middle to create something neither could have made alone. One figure was translucent, already half gone, but his paint remained vivid on the canvas. The other was solid but incomplete until the ghostly figure's colors joined hers. "For your brother," Claire said when she presented it to Sarah. "For the guardian he became without knowing it." Sarah cried, tracing the ghostly figure with one finger. "He would have said this was meant to be." He believed in what he called the cosmic arrangement of suffering and grace. The day before entering the hospital for conditioning, Claire sat in the backyard with Ivy, both of them painting the spring evening. Ivy had grown so much in the past year, not just in height, but in depth, her artwork showing an understanding of loss and beauty that no 11-year-old should have, but this one did. "If something happens," Claire began, but Ivy cut her off. "Nothing's going to happen. Sarah's marrow is going to save you, and you're going to teach me about shadows and perspective and all the things I still need to learn. But if—" "No." Ivy's voice was fierce. "Mama Lena didn't get to say goodbye properly. She was too sick at the end, but you're not there yet, so instead of goodbye, teach me something. Right now, something important. Claire studied this remarkable child who'd become her daughter in every way that mattered. Okay, the most important thing about art isn't technique or talent, it's continuing. No matter what happens, you keep creating, promise me. Only if you promise to survive this and teach me the rest yourself. I promise to try. No, Ivy said with her mother's stubbornness and her father's certainty. Promise to succeed. Claire pulled her close, breathing in her paint and sunshine smell. I promise. The conditioning nearly killed her. 7 days of chemistry so toxic that Ethan had to wear protective gear just to be in the room. Claire couldn't paint. Her hands shook too badly, but she could still see, still observe the play of light on the hospital walls. The way Ethan's face changed through the days, aging and softening simultaneously. On the 8th day, Sarah arrived with the harvest of her bone marrow, a bag of life that looked unremarkable hanging from an IV pole. My brother's name was David, she said as the transplant began. He was 27, painted portraits mostly, said every face was a universe waiting to be explored. I think he would have painted you. You have the kind of face that shows every story it's lived. The marrow dripped slowly into Claire's body, and she imagined she could feel it taking root. Sarah's healthy cells finding home in her hollow bones. It would take weeks to know if the transplant was successful, weeks of isolation, of waiting, of hoping. But 3 days in, something shifted. Claire felt it like a subtle electric current, a sense of rightness she hadn't experienced in years. She asked for paper and pencil, her hands finally steady enough to sketch. What emerged wasn't a guardian or a landscape, but a simple interior scene, a hospital room transformed by imagination into a studio, with phantom paintings covering the walls, invisible brushes painting invisible worlds. She titled it The Art of Waiting. Ethan visited every day, talking through the glass barrier, reading Elena's poetry and Ivy's school reports and reviews of Claire's work from critics who didn't know she was fighting for her life again. Marcus had organized the art community to send daily videos, artists from around Austin sharing techniques, discussing color theory, keeping Claire connected to the world beyond sterile walls. On day 14, her blood counts started rising. Slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. Sarah's marrow had taken hold, was building new blood, new immunity, new possibility. It's working, Dr. Morrison announced on day 21, his professional composure cracking to show genuine elation. Your body is accepting the transplant beautifully. We're seeing healthy cell production across all lines. Claire was allowed to hold Ethan's hand for the first time in 3 weeks. The contact was electric, life-affirming, a reminder of what she'd been fighting for. You did it, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. You stubborn, brilliant, impossible woman. You did it. We did it, she corrected, thinking of Sarah's sacrifice, Ethan's steadfast presence, Ivy's fierce belief, the community that had carried her when she couldn't walk alone. Recovery was slow but steady. Claire had to relearn her body, newly made from someone else's gift. Foods tasted different, colors seemed brighter. It was, she realized, a third incarnation. The artist before cancer, the artist with cancer, and now the artist reborn from someone else's marrow. She was home for Ivy's 11th birthday, still weak but present. The party was smaller this year, intimate, but no less joyful. Ivy had asked for only one thing, for Claire to paint with her, really paint like they used to. They sat in the studio, spring light streaming through windows, and created together. Not teacher and student, but two artists conversing in color. Ivy's painting showed a figure emerging from darkness into light, surrounded by guardians both mythical and real, doctors, nurses, family members with wings. It's you, Ivy explained, but also everyone who fights and everyone who helps. We're all guardians, and we all need guarding. Claire's painting was simpler, 3 figures at a table sharing a meal, ordinary and miraculous simultaneously, the kind of scene she'd never thought she'd live to paint. It's us, she said, next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and all the Tuesdays I get. Sarah visited regularly, becoming part of their extended family. She'd bring stories of her brother, and Claire would show her new paintings, and somehow David became present in his absence, another guardian in their growing pantheon of protectors. 6 months post-transplant, Claire received news that seemed impossible. She was pregnant. The chemotherapy should have made it impossible. The radiation should have destroyed any chance. But there it was on the ultrasound, a tiny heartbeat that Dr. Morrison called medically improbable. It happens sometimes, he said, shaking his head in wonder. The bone marrow transplant, the cellular renewal, sometimes it restarts systems we thought were permanently damaged. Ethan was terrified and elated in equal measure. Is it safe? For Claire? For the baby? There are risks, Dr. Morrison admitted. Claire's body has been through tremendous trauma, but her current blood work is perfect. Sarah's marrow has given her a essentially new hematological system. We'll monitor closely, but I'm optimistic. Ivy's reaction was pure joy. A baby! A real baby! Can we name it after a color, like cerulean or vermilion? We're not naming our child after paint, Ethan said firmly, but he was smiling. Our child, Claire repeated, the words feeling impossible and perfect. We're having a child. The pregnancy was carefully monitored, with weekly checks that felt excessive but necessary. Claire painted through it all, creating a series called Genesis that explored creation on every level, cellular, artistic, human. Her belly grew along with the paintings, both acts of creation that seemed equally miraculous. Marcus organized another show, this one titled Resurrection, the Art of Claire Dawson Hayes. The invitation featured the coffee-stained sunset painting that had started everything, with the words, "Beauty persists in the ruins, and from the ruins, new beauty grows." The opening was a month before Claire's due date. She moved through the gallery slowly, heavily pregnant but radiant, greeting collectors and critics and the growing community of artists and cancer survivors who'd found hope in her story. Your work has evolved, a critic noted, studying the new pieces. There's a joy here that wasn't present before, even in the darker pieces. I've learned that joy and sorrow aren't opposites, Claire replied, her hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked as if in agreement. They're partners, like fear and bravery. The joy is richer because it knows what sorrow tastes like. The baby came 2 weeks early, during a thunderstorm that reminded Claire of the day she met Ethan. The delivery was complicated. Her body, rebuilt from trauma, struggled with this new challenge. But she'd learned how to fight, how to persist, how to transform pain into purpose. David Ross Hayes was born at dawn, screaming with healthy lungs that had never known poison, his eyes the same brown as Ethan's, his fingers already reaching for invisible brushes. They'd named him after Sarah's brother, the artist whose death had led to Claire's rebirth. He's perfect, Ivy breathed, holding her brother with careful reverence. Look, he's already making art with his hands. Sarah was there within hours, crying as she held the baby her marrow had made possible. David would have said this was the ultimate collaboration, art creating life, creating art. Claire, exhausted but euphoric, watched her family gather around this new life. Ethan holding their son with wonder. Ivy already planning all the art projects she'd teach him. Sarah, whose gift had made it all possible. Rosa and Elena's parents seeing their daughter's love continue in new forms. We need a new guardian painting, Ivy announced, for David's room. Something that protects babies and celebrates miracles and shows that broken things can create perfect things. Claire already knew what she would paint, not a mythical creature this time, but a tree. Roots that had pushed through concrete, been cut back, poisoned, burned, but somehow kept growing. Branches that held nests for new life, leaves that turned light into sustenance. A tree that was scarred and beautiful and absolutely, impossibly alive. That night, as Claire nursed her son in the room that had once been Elena's studio, now transformed into a nursery filled with art from 3 generations of creators, she thought about the journey from that Austin sidewalk to this moment. She'd started by selling paintings to fund chemotherapy, desperate brushstrokes trying to buy time. What she'd found instead was a love that transcended loss, a family built on the ruins of tragedy, and the discovery that art wasn't just about creating beauty, it was about insisting on beauty's existence, even when everything suggested otherwise. Your story, Ethan said from the doorway, watching her nurse their son, should be impossible. All the best stories are, Claire replied, thinking of Elena's poetry, Sarah's brother's portraits, Ivy's guardian dragons, and now David, their living proof that miracles were just stubborn hope wearing probability's clothes. Outside, Austin sprawled under stars and streetlights, a city of music and art and breakfast tacos and people who stopped to help strangers collect scattered paintings. Somewhere out there, someone else was fighting their own impossible battle. Claire hoped they would find their guardian, their Ethan, their reason to keep painting even when the canvas seemed ruined. Because that was the secret she'd learned. The painting was never really ruined. It was just waiting for the right eyes to see what it could become, for the right hands to transform disaster into beauty, for the right heart to insist that love was bigger than loss, that creation was stronger than destruction, that sometimes the universe did answer desperate prayers, just not in the language you expected. David made a small sound, milk-drunk and content, and Claire began to hum, a lullaby Elena had written, that Ivy had translated, that would now soothe another generation. The melody drifted through the house where three broken people had become a family, where paint and poetry and promise lived in equal measure, where guardians were real because people chose to guard each other. Tomorrow she would paint. Tomorrow Ivy would have school, and Ethan would have houses to rebuild, and David would need feeding and changing and all the ordinary miracles of new life. Tomorrow the work would continue, the art, the love, the careful tending of beauty in a world that tried so hard to destroy it. But tonight, Claire held her impossible child and knew that she had won. Not just against cancer, though that victory was sweet. She had won the right to tomorrow, to all the tomorrows that stretched ahead like blank canvases waiting for color. She had won the chance to teach Ivy about negative space and David about positive creation. She had won Ethan's love and Sarah's marrow and a community that caught her when she fell. Most of all, she had won the knowledge that broken things weren't endings but beginnings, that beauty didn't avoid the ruins but grew from them, stubborn and glorious, and absolutely, impossibly alive. David was 3 months old when Claire received the call that would change everything again. She was in the studio, painting while he slept in a bassinet nearby, Ivy working on her homework at the table they'd installed for family art time. The phone rang with an unfamiliar international number. Mrs. Dawson Hayes, this is Jonathan Whitmore from the Whitmore Foundation in London. We've been following your work and your story. We'd like to offer you something rather unprecedented. Claire shifted David to her other arm as he fussed, his tiny fingers grasping at her paint-stained shirt. I'm listening. A global exhibition, 20 cities starting in London, ending in Seoul. We want to share your Guardian series with the world, but more than that, we want to document your technique, your philosophy. We're proposing a documentary film crew follow you for 6 months, culminating in a live painting demonstration at the Tate Modern. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. The Tate Modern, the gallery she dreamed about as an art student before cancer had rewritten her definition of dreams. I have a 3-month-old baby. I'm still in recovery from a bone marrow transplant. I don't know if I can bring them all, Whitmore interrupted. Your family is part of the story. The foundation will cover everything: travel, accommodation, medical support. We have a pediatrician on staff who specializes in traveling with infants. Mrs. Dawson Hayes, your story isn't just about art anymore. It's about proving that life persists, that creativity transcends circumstances. That evening, the Hayes family held a council around the dinner table. David dozed in his bouncer, while Ivy practically vibrated with excitement. London! Paris! Tokyo! She exclaimed, reading from the itinerary Whitmore had sent. Dad, we'd see the Louvre. Mom Claire could paint in places real artists painted. Real artists? Claire teased. What am I, imaginary? You know what I mean. Historical artists, dead ones, famous dead ones. Ethan was quieter, studying the medical support documentation. They've thought of everything. Partnered hospitals in each city, a traveling nurse, insurance for any complications. But Claire could read his hesitation. But you just got stable. David's so young. What if something goes wrong halfway around the world? What if nothing goes wrong? Ivy countered with 11-year-old logic. What if it's amazing and Mom Claire becomes the most famous living artist and baby David sees the whole world before he can even walk? Claire looked at her son, who'd inherited her pale complexion and Ethan's stubborn chin. She thought about the tree painting she'd created for his nursery, roots that persisted despite everything. "We're not trees," she said slowly. "We don't have to stay planted in one spot. Maybe moving, traveling, sharing the story. Maybe that's how we grow stronger." Elena always wanted to travel, Ethan said quietly. She had a list of museums she wanted to see. The Tate was number 3, after the Prado and the Uffizi. "Then we go," Claire decided. "We take Elena's list and Ivy's enthusiasm and David's fresh eyes, and we see the world. We show them that Austin, Texas, produces survivors who make beauty from ruins." The preparation took 2 months. Claire had to be cleared by Dr. Morrison, who ran every test imaginable before grudgingly admitting she was healthy enough to travel. Sarah helped research medical facilities in each city, creating a detailed medical file that would accompany them everywhere. Marcus coordinated with galleries along the route, turning the tour into a moving exhibition that would fund cancer treatment for artists in each city they visited. The documentary crew arrived a week before departure, 2 young filmmakers named Ben and Amara, who specialized in artist profiles. They filmed Claire in the studio, teaching Ivy about color theory while David watched from his bouncer, his eyes tracking the movement of brushes like he was memorizing the motions. "Tell us about the first Guardian," Amara prompted, camera focused on the unicorn dragon painting that had started it all. Ivy answered before Claire could. "I asked for it because Mom Elena couldn't guard me anymore. But then Mom Claire painted it, and it turned out she was the real Guardian all along. The painting was just how we recognized her." The filmmakers exchanged glances, recognizing gold when they heard it. They spent the next days capturing the family's daily life. Ethan teaching David to grasp rattles with the same patience he used for renovation work, Ivy and Claire painting side by side, family dinners where 3 languages mixed, English, Spanish, and what Ivy called baby babble. "You're not what we expected," Ben admitted on the last day of filming in Austin. "Most artists we profile are tortured, isolated. You're so as alive," Claire finished. "Trust me, I'm as surprised as you are." London was cold and gray when they arrived in November. David bundled in blankets Ivy had insisted on decorating with fabric paint. The Whitmore Foundation had provided a flat near the Tate with views of the Thames and space for Claire to paint. The first event was a private reception at the National Gallery. Claire stood before Turner's paintings, David in a carrier against her chest, feeling like an imposter until an elderly woman approached. "You're Claire Dawson Hayes," the woman said with a cultivated British accent. "I've been following your work since that first gallery show in Austin. Lost my husband to lymphoma 2 years ago. Your guardians, they helped me understand that protection doesn't always mean prevention. Sometimes it means accompanied suffering." More people approached with similar stories. A young man whose daughter was fighting leukemia. A couple who'd lost their son but found comfort in Claire's Phoenix Wolf painting. Each person had found something in her work that transcended the canvas. "You're not just painting anymore," Ethan observed that night, watching Claire nurse David by the window, London lights reflecting on the Thames. "You're ministering." "Is that what this is?" Claire was exhausted, the time change and emotions taking their toll. "Mom Claire is a minister of paint," Ivy declared from where she was sketching Big Ben at midnight, too excited to sleep. "That's definitely going in the documentary." The Tate Modern event was scheduled for their last week in London. Claire would paint live for 6 hours, creating a new Guardian while the documentary crew filmed and audiences watched. The pressure was immense, unlike anything she'd faced in her art career. 3 days before the event, David developed a fever. Nothing serious, the pediatrician assured them, just a cold. But Claire's mind spiraled to worst-case scenarios. She sat up all night, holding him, thinking of all the ways bodies could betray you. "He's not you," Ethan said gently at dawn, taking David so Claire could shower. "He's healthy. His immune system works. This is just a cold." "I know that logically, but my body doesn't understand logic anymore. It just understands fear." "Then paint the fear," Ivy suggested, appearing in the doorway with her sketchbook. "That's what you taught me. When feelings are too big, make them into art." So Claire painted fear, a dark creature with too many eyes and grasping tentacles. But as she painted, something shifted. The tentacles became arms holding, protecting. The eyes became watchful rather than threatening. Fear transformed into vigilance, terror into protective love. It's still a guardian, Amara observed, filming the transformation. Even your fear becomes protective. David's fever broke that evening, and by the day of the Tate event, he was back to his sunny self, charming everyone with his gummy smiles. The museum had set up Claire's painting station in the main turbine hall, surrounded by her existing works on loan from various collectors. The crowd was bigger than expected, not just art enthusiasts, but cancer survivors, medical professionals, parents of sick children, all drawn by the story of art as survival mechanism. Claire felt their eyes like weight, but also like wings, lifting her, expecting transformation. She began with broad strokes of blue, unsure what guardian would emerge. As she painted, she talked, explaining her process, but also her philosophy. People think art is about beauty, she said, adding layers of purple and silver. But it's really about truth. And the truth is that life is both beautiful and terrible, often simultaneously. The guardians I paint, they don't promise to eliminate suffering. They promise to witness it, to stand watch, to remind us that we're not alone in the dark. A figure emerged on the canvas, part human, part celestial, with wings made of what looked like medical charts and IV tubing transformed into feathers. The face was kind but tired, scarred but smiling. It looked like every nurse Claire had known, every fellow patient, every family member who'd stood watch during the dark hours. "What will you call it?" someone from the audience asked as the painting neared completion. Claire stepped back, seeing the full image for the first time. "The Night Shift Guardian, for everyone who keeps watch when the world sleeps." The applause was thunderous, but Claire barely heard it. She was watching Ivy, who had set up her own easel nearby and painted alongside her for the entire 6 hours. The girl's painting showed a family of guardians, different sizes, different colors, but all connected by threads of gold that looked like hope made visible. "We're going to hang these together," the Tate director announced. "Mother and daughter, side by side, if that's acceptable." Ivy looked like she might explode with pride. "Mom, Claire, we're going to be in a museum together." Paris was next, the city of lights dim under winter rain. They stayed near the Louvre, and Claire spent hours in front of masterpieces she'd only seen in textbooks, David sleeping against her chest, absorbing art through proximity. These painters had no idea their work would last centuries, she told the documentary crew while standing before a Rembrandt. They just painted what they needed to paint. The lasting is accidental. The creating is essential. The Paris exhibition was at a small gallery in Montmartre, intimate where London had been grand. The audience was different too, more artists, more intellectuals, people who wanted to discuss technique and symbolism rather than just story. "Your use of water," a French artist noted, "it's like you're dissolving boundaries between states of being. Solid and liquid, life and death, hope and despair." "Water is honest," Claire replied through a translator. "It finds its way through everything, around everything, like life, like cancer, like love." Ethan had been quieter since London, and in Paris, Claire finally asked why. "I'm watching you become who you were meant to be," he said as they walked along the Seine, Ivy running ahead, David asleep in the stroller. "And I'm realizing that Austin might not be big enough to hold you anymore." "Austin holds you," Claire said simply. "That makes it big enough." "But what if—" "No what ifs. We promised, remember?" Present tense. Right now, in this moment, we're in Paris. Our daughter is sketching Notre Dame. Our son is dreaming in colors he doesn't have names for yet. You're here, I'm here, we're alive. That's all that matters.
Happy.
Berlin, Madrid, Rome, each city brought new audiences, new stories of survival and loss, new connections between art and healing. The documentary crew captured it all. Ivy teaching German children to paint guardians, David taking his first steps in the Prado, Claire painting in the Sistine Chapel's shadow, while tears streamed down her face. "Why are you crying?" Amara asked gently, camera rolling. "Because I'm here," Claire said simply. 18 months ago, I was dying on a sidewalk in Austin. Now I'm painting in Rome. The miracle of it is too big for my body to hold without leaking. The call came in Amsterdam. Dr. Morrison, his voice careful across the international connection. Your latest blood work shows some anomalies. Nothing urgent, but I'd like you to come home for tests when the tour is done. Claire stood in their rented apartment, looking out at canals that had existed for centuries, and felt time compress. There was never enough of it, no matter how much you fought for more. How bad? She asked quietly. I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. But Claire, you've had 2 years of stability. 2 years of miracles. Whatever this is, we'll face it. She didn't tell Ethan immediately. They had 3 more cities, Stockholm, Oslo, Seoul, and she wanted them unmarred by fear. But he knew her too well, saw the shadow pass over her eyes. Tell me, he said that night after Ivy and David were asleep. So she did, and he held her while she cried. And then they did what they'd learned to do. They kept living, kept moving, kept creating, because stopping meant letting fear win. Stockholm was a blur of white nights and guardian paintings finding homes with collectors who understood that art was medicine by other means. Oslo brought a surprise. Sarah had flown in to see them, to check on the boy her marrow had made possible. He's perfect, she said, holding David, who at 9 months was babbling constantly and trying to eat paintbrushes. He looks like you when you concentrate, that little furrow between his eyebrows. He looks like life insisting on itself, Claire said, like proof that bodies can create as well as destroy. Seoul was the final stop, and the most overwhelming. The audience was massive, the interest intense. Korean families who'd lost children to leukemia, artists who'd found inspiration in the Guardian series, collectors who saw investment and meaning in equal measure. Claire painted for 12 hours straight at the Seoul Museum of Art, creating the largest Guardian she'd ever attempted. It was a tree, like the one in David's nursery but more complex. The roots were visible, tangled with bones and medical equipment, transformed into something life-giving. The trunk bore scars that looked like Korean and English and Spanish words for survive. The branches held not leaves but small painted panels, each one a tiny guardian protecting something specific. A child's laugh, a couple's first dance, the smell of coffee on Sunday mornings. It's everyone, Ivy breathed when Claire finally stepped back, exhausted and exhilarated. It's all of us, isn't it? We're all the Guardian tree. The Korean press called it a masterpiece. The museum immediately acquired it for their permanent collection, but all Claire could think about was going home, getting tested, finding out what new battle awaited. The flight home was 20 hours of suspended time. David fussed, Ivy sketched, Ethan planned renovations for houses he'd see in 15 hours, and Claire painted in watercolor notebooks, small guardians for the people they'd met, as if she could protect them all with pigment and intention. Austin's heat hit them like a familiar slap, but it felt like an embrace. Marcus met them at the airport, his gallery van loaded with their accumulated artwork and purchases. You're international now, he said, grinning. I've had calls from everywhere. The Guggenheim wants a retrospective. The Whitney is interested in commissioning a series. First, I need to see my doctor, Claire said quietly, and Marcus's grin faded. The test took 3 days. Blood work, scans, a bone marrow biopsy that brought back all the old traumas. Claire painted through the waiting, creating a series she called The In-Between, guardians caught in moments of transformation, neither one thing nor another. Dr. Morrison entered the consultation room with an expression Claire couldn't read. Her hand found Ethan's, bracing for impact. It's not cancer, he said immediately. Not a relapse, not a new cancer. But Claire, your body is doing something unexpected. The markers we're seeing, they're consistent with an autoimmune response. Your body is attacking itself, but very specifically. It's going after residual cancer cells we didn't even know were there. I don't understand, Ethan said. Sarah's marrow didn't just rebuild your blood system, Dr. Morrison explained. It seems to have trained your immune system to recognize and destroy cancer cells more efficiently than normal. You're not sick, Claire. You're upgraded. Your body has become its own guardian. Claire laughed, sharp, surprised, almost hysterical. You're saying I'm accidentally cured? I'm saying your body has developed a mechanism we don't fully understand. We'll need to monitor it, study it. You might be the key to new treatment protocols, but right now, today, you're healthier than you've been since before your initial diagnosis. That night, they celebrated quietly at home. Ivy painted David's face with washable markers while he giggled. Ethan cooked Elena's enchiladas with Claire's salad and store-bought tres leches cake. The documentary crew, who'd extended their timeline to capture this moment, filmed from the corner, almost forgotten. "What now?" Ben asked as they prepared to leave. "The tour's over, you're healthy, the world knows your work. What comes next?" Claire looked at her family, Ethan washing dishes with David on his hip, Ivy explaining to the camera why purple was scientifically proven to be the best color. She thought about Elena's poetry journals, Sarah's brother's portraits, all the guardians painted and yet to be painted. "Now we live," she said simply. "We wake up tomorrow, and Ivy goes to school, and Ethan renovates a house, and David learns new words, and I paint. Not because I'm dying, but because I'm alive. The ordinary miracle, repeated daily." "That doesn't sound like much of an ending," Amara observed. "Endings are overrated," Claire replied. "I prefer middles, the part where life is happening, messy and beautiful and continuous." 6 months later, the documentary premiered at South by Southwest in Austin. Claire sat in the dark theater holding Ethan's hand, Ivy on her other side, David thankfully asleep in his carrier. She watched their story unfold on screen, the sidewalk meeting, the gallery triumph, the transplant, the tour, all of it edited into something that looked like purpose when it had felt like chaos. But the part that made her cry was the ending Ben and Amara had chosen. Not the museum exhibitions or the international acclaim, but a simple scene. Claire teaching Ivy to paint while David played with brushes at their feet, Ethan reading Elena's poetry aloud, Sarah visiting with groceries, Marcus stopping by with news from the gallery, Rosa bringing her mother's tamales. The extended, impossible, beautiful family they'd built from ruins. The film ended with Claire's voice over a montage of guardian paintings finding homes around the world. "People ask me if I believe in God, in fate, in meaning. I don't know about God, but I believe in grace, the kind that appears as a stranger's kindness on your worst day. I don't know about fate, but I believe in choice, the daily decision to create instead of destroy. I don't know about meaning, but I believe in beauty, not as decoration, but as defiance, insisting on its existence in the face of everything that says it shouldn't exist. We are all guardians. We are all guarded. We are all painting our survival with whatever colors we can find." The lights came up to thunderous applause. Claire stood, uncomfortable with the attention, until Ivy tugged her back down. "They're not clapping for you," the now 12-year-old said with wisdom beyond her years. "They're clapping for the possibility, for the proof that broken things can become beautiful. That's bigger than any one person." Later, at the after-party Marcus had insisted on throwing, Claire found herself on the gallery's back patio, the same one where Ethan had told her to focus on fighting before thinking about love. 3 years had passed since then. 3 years of fighting and loving simultaneously, of discovering they weren't mutually exclusive but mutually reinforcing. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, finding her in the dark, David asleep on his shoulder. "One," Claire said, the same answer she always gave. "Still wish you'd fallen in front of me sooner. Every day, all those wasted healthy years when I could have loved you without IVs and terror and exhaustion. But then you wouldn't be you," he pointed out, "and I wouldn't be me. And Ivy wouldn't have 2 mothers' wisdom braided into her art, and David wouldn't exist at all." "The cosmic arrangement of suffering and grace," Claire murmured, remembering Sarah's brother's philosophy. "Mom! Dad!" Ivy burst through the door, paint somehow already in her hair despite the formal occasion. "There's a girl here. She's 15, she has leukemia, and she wants to know if Mom Claire will teach her to paint guardians." Claire looked at Ethan, who smiled. "Go," he said. "Go be the guardian you needed 3 years ago." Claire found the girl, thin, bald, scared, angry, trying to be brave. Everything Claire had been that day on the sidewalk. "I don't know if I have time to learn," the girl said, her mother hovering anxiously nearby. "Then we'll paint fast," Claire said, already pulling out the supplies she'd learned to keep everywhere. "But more importantly, we'll paint true. What do you need to guard? What needs guarding in you?" As the girl began to paint, tentative strokes becoming bolder, Claire saw the cycle beginning again. Art as medicine, creation as rebellion, beauty as proof that human beings were more than their biology, more than their mortality, more than the sum of their broken parts. "Will I be good at this?" the girl asked. "You already are," Claire said. "You picked up the brush. That's the hardest part. Everything else is just practice and persistence." "And guardians?" the girl asked hopefully. "And guardians," Claire agreed. "Visible and invisible, painted and human. The ones we create and the ones who find us when we need them most." The party continued around them, but Claire's world had shrunk to this moment, this teaching, this passing on of what she'd learned. Ethan appeared with water for both of them. Ivy set up her own easel to paint alongside the girl. David woke and babbled appreciatively at the colors. "This is what survival looks like," Claire told the documentary crew, who'd started filming again, unable to resist the scene. "Not just living through something, but living beyond it. Taking what tried to kill you and transforming it into something that helps others live." The girl's painting was rough but powerful, a creature part shadow, part light, wings made of hospital bracelets transformed into armor. "It's perfect," Claire told her. "It's yours. No one else could have painted exactly that guardian." "Will you sign it?" the girl asked shyly. "So I can remember?" Claire signed it but also added her phone number. "For when you need reminders that this isn't the end of your story. It's a chapter, a hard chapter, but not the last one." As the girl and her mother left, clutching the painting like a talisman, Ivy looked up at Claire with those eyes that saw everything. "You're going to teach more people, aren't you? Like, officially?" Claire considered this. The tour had shown her how hungry people were for beauty in their darkness, for permission to create even while suffering. "Maybe," she said. "What would that look like?" "Guardian workshops," Ivy exclaimed, already envisioning it. "In hospitals, for patients and families, teaching people to paint their protectors. Dad could build portable easels, and baby David could, well, he could be cute and make people smile." "The Hayes Family Guardian Project," Ethan said, testing the words. "Art as survival strategy." "We'd need funding," Claire said practically. "The documentary is going to make bank," Marcus called from across the patio. "And I know 12 collectors who'd fund this yesterday." Claire looked at her family, chosen and born, extended and immediate, and saw the future spreading out like a canvas waiting for paint. Not the future she'd planned as a young artist, not the future cancer had tried to steal, but the future that had emerged from the collision of disaster and grace. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." The stars were bright over Austin that night, despite the city's glow. Claire stood with her family, surrounded by art and love and the impossible made manifest. 3 years ago, she'd been dying on a sidewalk, watching her paintings scatter in the wind. Now she was teaching others to paint their way through darkness, proof that sometimes the universe did answer desperate prayers, not with the miracles you expected, but with the ones you couldn't have imagined. "Tell us another story about the Guardians," Ivy requested, settling against Claire's side. "Which one?" "A new one we haven't heard yet." Claire smiled, pulling her daughter closer while Ethan held their son, the 4 of them standing together in the Texas night. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a guardian who didn't know she was a guardian. She thought she was just trying to survive. But every time she painted, every time she chose creation over destruction, she was actually protecting everyone who would come after, showing them that the ruins weren't endings but foundations, that broken things could be beautiful, that love was the most powerful guardian of all." "Is that us?" Ivy asked sleepily. "That's everyone," Claire said. "Everyone who chooses to keep going, keep creating, keep loving despite everything. We're all guardians, baby. We're all guarding each other." As if in agreement, David reached out with his small hand, grasping at something invisible in the air, perhaps a guardian only he could see, or maybe just the light from the gallery windows painting patterns in the darkness. Either way, it was beautiful. Either way, it was enough. Either way, it was proof that life insisted on itself over and over, in paint and poetry, in love and loss, in the daily miracle of waking up and choosing to create rather than surrender. The party went on inside, but the Hayes family stayed on the patio, held in the circle of their own light, guardians and guarded, painters of possibility, living proof that sometimes the best stories were the ones that refused to end, They just kept going, adding chapters and colors, each day a new brushstroke in a masterpiece that would never truly be finished because life, like art, was about the process, not the product. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new paintings, new people to teach and guard and love. But tonight, under the vast Texas sky, they were complete.